Welcome to a special extended edition of Novara Live on a devastating day for the Labour Party across England, Scotland and Wales. And we'll have guests from Labour to lick their wounds, the Greens to discuss some of their wins, and Plaid Cymru, who've also had a brilliant day. We'll also speak to analysts from the northwest of England and Scotland. Here in our London studio, I'm joined by Ash Sarkar. Ash, have you been glued to your screens?
I have been, because as I was saying before we went live, I just love elections. I love the civic effervescence of it. I love putting the cross in with paper. I love seeing people sort of scuttle across various municipal buildings, holding boxes of ballots. It's all the drama. I just love it, Michael.
And just as we went live, I've seen that my home borough, Waltham Forest, where I'm from, has just turned green. I think the Greens had 0 seats, and they now have a majority. So fairly impressive. You've been watching closely Haringey.
I've been watching Haringey very, very closely. My housemate, Rory Payton, was the Greens' first ever councillor in Haringey, stood and won in a by-election last year. And it's on a knife edge right now. So the range of possible outcomes is pretty big. But already the Greens have, I think improved the number of councillors 9-fold. So pretty good.
I have a new mayor in Hackney where I now live. But we're not just going to navel gaze and talk about London for the next 2 hours. We are going to give a broad sweep of the nation and the nations. Aaron Bastani is also in the building. He'll be swapping out with us over the course of the next couple of hours, as is evident. This is a massive day in UK politics. The two-party system is dead, and this is the only place to be for the next 2 hours. And you know what I'm going to say next. This show, and especially these extended shows, are only possible because of your support. With British politics in flux, it's crucial we have independent media to help you make sense of it all, and hopefully to help shape where this unpredictable moment takes us. Straight into, our only story of this evening, a roundup of what's happened today. Local elections, as well as national parliamentary elections in Scotland and Wales, have produced one of the most disruptive political events in recent British history, namely, as I say, the end of the two-party system. This is the current state of gains and losses in councils across England. As it stands, this will be updated as the show goes on. So as we're speaking now, Labour have lost 465 council seats. The Conservatives have lost 272. The Lib Dems are up 44. Reform are up 761. Pretty phenomenal. The Greens are up 60. And I suppose others is too broad a category, really, to take much from it. Here's where we stand in terms of council control. So Labour have lost 15 councils so far, and the Conservatives have lost 4. The Lib Dems have gained 1. Reform have gained 6. It says there the Greens have gained 1, but I know actually that they've now gained 2 because that should include Norwich and Waltham Forest. But as I say, we'll keep updating these as we go. This graph from Sky shows how today's results would translate to a national vote share in a general election. Of course, you've got to remember this is if people in a general election vote in the same way that they vote in a local election, which isn't necessarily, they never do, basically, but it's still sort of an interesting stat to look at, which is that it would have been Reform winning with 27%, the Tories on 20%, Labour on 16%, the Lib Dems on 14%, and the Greens on 13%, and other on 10%. So the idea of a general election where the party in the lead gets 27%, completely unheard of, will be very, very difficult to project how those seats would pan out. Now, clearly, this is a great result for Reform's Nigel Farage. Here's how he celebrated in the London borough of Havering, which Reform won control of this morning.
The pattern that's emerging over the country is that Labour are being wiped out by Reform in many of their most traditional areas. And what you're going to see later on today is the Conservative Party being wiped out in their heartlands like Essex. So London goes a bit against the trend in that the Conservatives and Labour have held up in some of the other boroughs. But I think overall what's happened is a truly historic shift in British politics.
After a bruising week or so, there's also lots of reasons for the Greens leader, Zach Polanski, to be in a good mood. He spoke to Sky earlier today.
In many places, your biggest contribution might be splitting the progressive vote paving the way for reform. Are you comfortable with that?
I would reject the idea that the Labour Party are a progressive vote. The Labour Party, since they got into office, have continued austerity. They tried to cut disability benefits. We had more children going into poverty for far too long. They brought Peter Mandelson into the heart of government, and we've seen an ongoing genocide in Gaza. So the idea that this Labour government offers any kind of progressive politics, I think, is for the birds. And actually, anyone who's on the left in politics, progressive, or even just wants a politics of common sense, where we're redistributing power and wealth away from multimillionaires and billionaires and putting it back into our communities, that's a vote for the Green Party. And what I'd say to anyone is, we need your help, and today is a brilliant day to join the Green Party.
So what about our Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who many Labour figures now hold responsible for today's total wipeout? Here's what he had to say.
Let me be clear, these are really tough results. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. And we have lost brilliant Labour representatives, people who put so much into their communities, so much into our party and our movement. And the voters have sent a message about the pace of change, how they want their lives improved. I was elected to meet those challenges, and I'm not going to walk away from those challenges and plunge the country into chaos.
Ash, Keir Starmer, he's going to do the honourable thing, not going to walk away, not going to plunge us into chaos. He's going to keep providing the stability that we've all been craving for so long.
But what I would remind Keir Starmer of is that it's not a straight choice between staying or chaos. You know, you can have both, which I think is the direction that we're heading in. I don't think that you can understate just how damaging this is for the faction that was around Keir Starmer. So if you take Starmer out of it, because we've talked about this many times, he's not a man who has many political beliefs of his own. This was a Labour right factional project. It took over the Labour Party. It purged candidates, MPs and members. It forced through retaining the two-child benefit cap. Of course, it's now been scrapped, but held on to it when it was unpopular. Tried to force through reforms to personal independence payments, winter fuel allowance, and of course the support for Israel whilst it was waging a genocidal war. The Labour right kind of got everything they wanted. And the result has been, rather than 20 points ahead, which was the famous slogan during Jeremy Corbyn's tenure, you know, Keir Starmer just jumped headfirst into the kind of favourability ratings that you normally see reserved for herpes. You know, like, he's a deeply unpopular guy. So I think that one of the ways in which you have to understand the present political crisis is that there's some really big picture stuff, failures of privatisation, collapsing living standards, a sort of parasitic model of the economy where wealth just gets, money just gets extracted out of public systems all the time. But then there is an internal Labour story as well, which is one faction won, and they were like a machine that could only do one thing. They could only take over the Labour Party. They didn't actually know how to run a country, govern a country, or do what's popular.
And I mean, as someone on the left looking at these results, I mean, obviously it's, be exciting for many people to see the Greens do so well. I'm very interested to see, what they will do in charge of Waltham Forest. They've got the mayoralties in Hackney, in Lewisham, which they won comfortably, by the way. We're yet to see the full council results in some of those places. I've just seen on the screen up there that Islington Labour have held. But I mean, the story in a way on a nationwide level is something we've become quite familiar with, I suppose, which is that in the inner cities, there is a competition between Labour and their left, who are the Greens, and the Greens are sort of increasingly outcompeting Labour. But in the rest of the country, if the progressive vote is remotely split, Reform will just walk it. And they have walked it in so many places. So like Wigan, Labour were defending 20 seats. They lost all 20. Right, we're going to talk about that in more detail later in the show. Hartlepool, similar. Lots of places where, which I think more are the kind of places that win and lose general elections, where really, obviously the Greens have momentum because they've sort of come from nothing to something quite in a short space of time, whereas we've seen Reform coming for a while. But you look at this, all the projections are saying the same thing. This is pointing to a stonking win, if not a majority, for Reform at the next general election.
Well, I suppose one of the things that we haven't talked about so far, and I think this will be a recurring theme, which is Reform have been able to capitalise on the collapse of the Conservative Party and then some. So what you're seeing in terms of where they're able to win, it's everything Boris Johnson could do and more. And that and more is really, really critical, right? Like that's the difference between, hitting a high watermark and then sort of like fading down as you become more and more like the Conservative Party. That and some goes, okay, well, you can maybe realign, politics in this country for decades, right? Like this might actually be the end or the sort of permanent decrepitude of the most successful electoral party in world history, the Conservative Party. In terms of what you said of the story is where there's a split progressive vote, where Labour's voters either stay at home or a significant portion peel off to the Greens. If you're outside of London, that lets Reform through. That is absolutely true.
Or any other, outside of London or outside of Manchester or Norwich, right, or any big inner city.
Out of the inner cities, where you don't have that combination of downwardly mobile graduates and or multiracial working class, right? Like that's the Greens' core demographics. I think that's absolutely true. I suppose if you do take that little step back, I don't think that you get the space for the Green Party without Reform first being the big disruptors to the two-party system in England. I actually don't think that you get that space created for the Green Party.
So you think Reform are going to have to win a general election before the Greens can sort of come forward?
Well, I think that Reform are part of creating that opportunity. I don't think that the Greens would have had the media time. I don't think that there would have been that sense of strategy of what you can do that's to the left of the Labour Party and outside of it. Like, I actually think that Reform sort of paves the way. I think that the question, and this is like a question that progressives have to reckon with, is what's more important to you? Is it keeping Reform out, or is it ending the two-party system, possibly for good, in Westminster? Like, there is a straight choice between those things.
Let's move on to look at the Labour Party in more detail. It's hard to describe today as anything but a catastrophe for Labour, and there's been a mix of reactions from Labour MPs to today's results.
So, just finally, does that mean you think that Keir Starmer should lead the party into the next general election?
I'm saying we need to go with the plan and not with the mood. People want stability and they want leadership.
So will he lead the Labour Party into the next general election?
I expect so, yes.
I think the best thing the Prime Minister could do is address the nation tomorrow and set a timetable for an orderly transition, and also make sure that in that transition, the widest talent pool possible can participate.
Should Andy Burnham be given the time to come back?
Look, I think blocking Andy Burnham was a real mistake. It demonstrated, again, a sort of a weakness in Kiera as well, doing that. It didn't help us.
Look, if Andy Burnham were in Parliament right now, he would be challenging Keir Starmer.
I think Keir would have been gone by now. That's the reality.
So
now the level of disillusionment means this isn't just a risk to losing a Labour government. We could lose the Labour Party. Now, that sounds like an exaggeration, but if you look at what's happening to us, once you start losing that grassroots base of your organisation and structure, you're threatened in your very existence.
That was Sarah Sackman, who's a cabinet member or minister, Starmer loyalist, London MP, Jonathan Brash, backbench MP for Hartlepool, and John McDonnell. As you can see, I'm now joined by Clive Lewis, MP for Norwich. Clive, these elections were a disaster. What's your sense of the mood in the wider PLP?
Paralysis. And that would be the word I would use at the moment. Frustration, despondency. None of them are good words. There's no one going, hey, look on the bright side. It's the kind of, the turkeys have come home to roost. I'm not sure if that's the right expression, but that's where it is. It feels at the moment that we are reaping what has been sown. And the Labour Party now, I think John McDonnell was spot on. It's something that many of us have been saying. It's existential for the Labour Party. But I think just listening to one of your former contributors, I thought the point being made, which is, and I think it's really critical here, there is a decision, there is a choice that has to be made between ending the two-party system, which I think is coming apart and unraveling anyway, but kept together almost, well, part of it are being kept together like a bag of blancmange by first past the post, and or stopping reform. And that's a Hobson's choice. I mean, who would want that choice? But that's the one that perhaps many voters are facing. You know, they're desperate for information. They're desperate. On the doorstep, I was getting people saying, Clive, I'm being told that I need to vote Green to stop reform. You're telling me I need to vote Labour here to stop reform. What do I do? And obviously, one of the things that's come out of this, of the last 24 hours, is people can now see from the election results, well, there is an opportunity, a potential opportunity here from these local election results to do this or to do that. But I personally feel that this is existential for the Labour Party. I think John was right. I think the pathocification of the party is potentially underway. You speak to French socialists. I know some of them. They were saying to me, you know, you are where we were back in 2011, 2012. You know, we can see what's happening. And it's happened to social democratic parties across Europe. It's now happening to you. It doesn't have to go that way, but I'm seeing the potential opportunities to prevent that kind of dissipating as we speak. There's now only a few realities where Labour, as things stand at the moment, could perhaps turn this around. So it's pretty poor. It's pretty abysmal. You know, I think the other thing to say is that there is going to be a need for the Labour Party or a party like the Labour Party. And I think Peter Kellner's been doing some interesting writing in the last 24 hours saying that these results show that where perhaps the Greens are is where Reform were before the last election. So the Greens, under first past the post, are not going to be able to kind of form the next government, not going to be able to, in many ways, be the second biggest party. Labour will probably still be bigger than them because of the discrepancies within first past the post. But what will happen is we will have a Reform government. I think there's a conversation to be had between now and the next general election among centre-left parties about what do we do to work together to be able to stop that. But Zach Polanski's point, I think, was spot on as well, in the sense that under Keir Starmer, the Labour Party is not seen as a centre-left progressive party. You know, you can only tell so many times you can tell people, you know where the door is. There's only so many times the Home Secretary can tell people to pee off. There's only so many times Labour MPs can say, or Labour sources can say, shaking off the fleas. Well, you've got your way. You've achieved that outcome, and your voters have left. So it's a dire situation. But if we're thinking beyond simple party politics, if we're thinking beyond simple tribal party politics, if our priority is stopping a quasi-fascist government that will make all of our opinions illegal, or many of our opinions illegal if they win, may begin to dismantle democracy, make it ever more difficult for them to be dislodged. It took Orban 16 years before he was ousted out. Then, you know, that's what we're currently facing. But I don't think it's acceptable for this Labour-led government by Keir Starmer to hold a gun to people's heads and say, you vote for us or you get reform. That's gone. That doesn't work. So clearly the Labour Party has a lot of soul-searching to do. And I think the Parliamentary Labour Party needs to step up and do what's right and act. Whether that happens or not is another matter, but that's what they need to do.
You know, to your credit, you've been saying for a while that Keir Starmer should go, that Andy Burnham should be allowed back into Westminster and he should stand. You've even offered your seat. Obviously, you know...
well, there's a technicality there, but let's not go into that.
Lots of people have been briefing the newspapers similar things to you, but very few of them are willing to say it publicly. There is, as you say, paralysis in the Labour Party. If this paralysis continues, I mean, from our interview today, you sound like you might be more comfortable in Zach Polanski's Greens. You're the constituent MP for Norwich. Norwich has just become a Green city council. I mean, can you see yourself flipping in the next year or so?
So the pause will become the story, I'm sure. The reality is, like, when you look at what's happening in politics, you know, if I put anything out on my social media underneath the timelines, why are you still in the Labour Party? Why haven't you joined the Greens? I mean, there was a period where, why haven't you joined your party? Now it's, why haven't you joined the Greens? And I've always said there's a bigger story here. You know, there is no There's no future where we don't have a reform government that doesn't involve a more progressive Labour Party. And if this party stays under Keir Starmer or, God forbid, under West Streeting, then what will happen is we will get a reform government. And then it's all bets off, because we can't, when you get a reform government, look at what Trump's doing. Look at the playbook of the far right. We don't even have a written constitution here to protect us. They begin to unpick at a rapid rate of knots our democracy and the institutions that make up that democracy. They've been eroding anyway, but they'll knock them down. Whether that's the BBC, whether that's the NHS, whether that's how you vote, where you vote, the ability, the high courts, the right to protest, all of those things which Labour have actually been undermining in the 2 years they've been in. But they will put that on rocket boosters. And that could mean that, where you think you're going to end up in a couple of elections' time doesn't happen. So I kind of feel, for me personally, the priority is, how do we stop reform? How do we stop them from achieving power? How do we minimize their momentum? And the Labour Party now still is a part of that story. I'm not being a martyr. None of us that are staying in the Labour Party are being martyrs. I look over at the Green Party and I look at the politics, I look at the policies, I look at many of the things they're doing, and you think that's those are things that I believe in. Those are things that I would like to see happen. But we also have to understand the Green Party, as currently configured, isn't going to win. There are places where only the Labour Party moving to the centre left could actually win. So we're going to have to kind of work out between us how we do that and how we stop them. But the starting point is Keir Starmer cannot be leading the Labour Party. The Labour Party needs to be led by someone who has a progressive vision and can reconnect with many of those Labour voters who have today or yesterday told us, we do not like where your party is and what you stand for. I know that's hard. A lot of people who are really angry with the Labour Party, really angry with anything and everything it does. But we do have to be strategic here. And we do have to think about the bigger picture, which is, how do we stop reform? And that, for me, is the key priority. And it's why many of us on the left have stayed in the Labour Party to attempt to do that.
And I mean, there's going to be a battle within the Labour Party over how to defeat reform, or on the broader left. And I suppose there are two wings, aren't there, really? There's one that says, look, reform are more of a threat to Labour because they've won so many seats. So we shouldn't get carried away with saying, okay, now we should just do all the progressive things we've always wanted to do and say that that's actually going to be electorally successful. And there are people who say, no, the message of this is we have to be true progressives. We have to be progressive on everything, migration, the economy, policing, all of these sorts of things. And, whether you polarize on liberal issues, I suppose. And back in 2019, you were one of the MPs who was sort of really quite strongly believed that the second referendum and sort of rallying around the hyper-liberal causes would help Labour win a majority. I'm slightly concerned that there are going to be a bunch of sort of left liberal Labour MPs who sort of come to the same conclusion this time around, not necessarily because it's sort of the sensible electoral thing to do, but because it's their comfort zone and they can persuade themselves that it is the right thing to do electorally. I don't know what you think about that.
I mean, look, on the issue of Brexit, everyone's got 2020 vision with hindsight. And I can sit here now and go, yeah, we should have taken Theresa May's, customs union deal. I mean, in hindsight, yeah, of course we should have. But the reality is, look at the world. I mean, do I think being inside the EU now would be a better, situation for this country? Yes, I do.
I suppose what I'm asking though,
I'm not going to deny it. So I guess I can second guess myself. But
I'm more asking.
Many of us do what we think is right.
I'm more asking like a values-based question, though, I suppose, which is sort of, do you think that Labour has to now be much more pro-immigration and much more sort of economically left-wing and much more liberal on social issues, or do you think that there is some kind of separate path which is going to be better at uniting, the sort of smaller towns with the cities, as opposed to maybe going for what Labour activists and sort of your own politics might naturally, instinctively gravitate towards?
Yeah, so being in the Labour Party is always a compromise. Under first past the post, you need to have that spread of opinions to be able to get yourself over the line. And we've never been that successful at it, because partly, for lots of reasons, but it's both the 20th and the 21st centuries have been those so far have been those of the Conservatives. But ultimately, where the Labour Party clearly now has to move to, we can see now that we are burning our base. We are burning the progressive voters who have historically supported the Labour Party. And they're either staying at home or shifting green and letting reform through, or staying at home, shifting green and and the Greens are winning. So depending on where you are. But, I don't think we can suddenly now try to mimic the Green Party. It wouldn't work. But there is a space, there is a golden thread, if you want, where the Labour Party can land, probably best articulated by Andy Burnham's politics. If what he is saying he can deliver in government, if he were to get in, is probably, we know from the polling where he lands, that is the magic thread that can bring both reform voters and people who have now opted for Green back into the Labour Party, back to voting Labour in enough seats to be able to blunt a reform government. That's the priority. That's where we need to land. That's what we need to do. Whether that's possible, we'll see in the next kind of few weeks and months whether that's possible. I think looking at the Parliamentary Labour Party, looking at the way that the party has operated so far, the control that the right of the party have of both the NEC, within the PLP, that looks like a very, very narrow path indeed.
Clive Lewis, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We really appreciate it. We'll be speaking to Zoe Garbett in one moment, so I'll go to you very quickly, Ash. The Greens have won Hastings, so that's 3 councils they've won control of now: Norwich, Hastings and Waltham Forest. Any quick comment?
One of the things that I want to sort of signpost is that the Greens winning these councils means that some paper candidates, people that didn't expect to win, will have won. This is the Greens' first time at doing politics at this scale, of being a serious electoral contender. And whether they can sort of match the enthusiasm of that surge with a programme of strategy and party discipline, I think that's going to really define whether or not they can hold on to these seats and hold on to these councils 4 years down the line.
We'll put that to Zoe in one moment. First of all, let's look at how the Greens have been doing today.
We are the antidote to reform, and actually I think we are having a tussle with reform over those voters who are very disillusioned with the political system, who feel left behind.
I don't think we're extreme. I think we're where most people in the country are in terms of things like investing in housing and public services and just trying to make the very richest in the country pay their fair share. These are very, very mainstream opinions out there. It's Labour and the Conservatives who've abandoned that.
I'll get more council houses from development. The people need somewhere affordable to stay. And I won't be silent about the government decisions that are harming Hackney residents, like continued austerity. It is both heart-wrenching and outrageous that something like 1 in 2 children in Hackney live in poverty. Every day I will work to fix this. Poverty isn't a fact, it's a political choice, and Hackney says no.
Two-party politics is not just dying, it is dead and it is buried. And actually, whether it's here that Labour have been rejected or whether we're seeing around the country, it's very clear that the new politics is the Green Party versus reform.
So let's look at some of those wins. So in Hackney, that was their first big win. Zoe Garbett won comfortably, 47% of the vote, about 9,000 more than Labour. Labour have had that position for 24 years. Garbett isn't the only new Green mayor in London. So in Lewisham, Liam Shrivastava beat the Labour candidate by 5,000 votes. The Greens have, as we've been saying, taken control of Waltham Forest, Hastings and Norwich. Here we go. So this is what happened on Norwich. The Greens gained 5. Labour lost 7. So now the Greens look like they've got a comfortable majority in that city. I'm joined now by Hackney's new mayor, Zoe Garbett. Congratulations on your win. I'll start with, what Ash was speaking to a moment ago. Are the Greens ready for this? I feel like you might have won a lot of places that you sort of 3 months ago, you didn't think you were going to win.
Yeah, we're absolutely ready. I'm really excited to be leading in Hackney. We've got a manifesto that was developed with residents from the casework we've done as councillors, from the organisations we've been speaking to, and we can't wait to get started. You know, I've got 10 years of working in the NHS, leading programmes, delivering service change. I've been on the London Assembly for 2 years, holding the Mayor of London to account and really getting under the skin of the systems that don't work. So yeah, I think we can really deliver. We've got people with a range of experience. Yes, they might not have been councillors before, but they come with their own personal experience of how the services have failed them. Like they've lived through the academy system, or they've lived through failing housing services. And that's the experience they bring, that they really understand how these services could be delivered better. So yeah, it's a brilliant day. I'm really excited.
And I mean, I don't think we have the full council results yet, do we, for Hackney? But let's imagine, for argument's sake, that the Greens win a majority on the council, which would give you, sort of in combination, quite a lot of power. And what do you do in your first 100 days?
Yeah, so got lots of results coming through. We've got lots of people elected so far. Really excited to see more people elected. So Dylan Law's just been elected. So in Hackney Downs, I've spoken quite a lot about selecting him as my deputy and him being in my cabinet. So it's really exciting that he has just secured his seat alongside Laura Louise and Alistair in Hackney Downs. But we've got, only about half the seats have been declared in Hackney. There's lots we want to do in the first 100 days. Fixing what's broken has been our real message that's resonated with people on the doorstep. So that's housing repairs services is the top one, and looking at school exclusions, which disproportionately affect our Black children and our SEND children, and really stamping out racism from our schools. We really want to look at who owns the community space. This is another thing that has been developed with community groups. I've visited food banks, the night shelter, organisations working with young people who at the end of the meeting all look me in the eye and say, we could do so much more if we just have more space. And we've got empty buildings sitting all around Hackney. So this is a review of who owns these buildings, who owns these spaces, and getting those back into community use and delivering for Hackney residents. And I really made that commitment. I know you just showed that segment of my speech around doing everything we can to address poverty. And that includes affordability around housing, but also pushing for food co-ops in all our estates, and looking at bringing people's energy bills down through community energy, and just doing as much as we can to make the everyday easier. So there's loads we want to get in and start delivering. You know, we're elected from Monday. I've already started thinking about transition planning and everything we need to do over the weekend to get that set up for Monday. And yeah, it's just incredible, really, that this has happened. I know it was looking good, but I don't think any of us, you don't believe these things are going to happen until the moment they happen. And I just think it's so exciting that we get to get in there and deliver this programme.
And I mean, I suppose sort of the most famous left-wing mayor in the world right now is Zoran Mamdani. I remember sort of he was asked sort of before he got elected, is there anything he sort of changed his mind on? And he was sounding sort of increasingly YIMBY, yes, in my backyard. So, he wants to do all these things, rent controls, publicly owned grocery stores, etc. But he was also saying, I do want to work with developers to build loads of new housing in New York, because we need, as well as tenure mattering, we need just physically loads more buildings, because loads more people want to live in New York than used to in the past. I mean, have you been on a similar journey, or are you still, I suppose, very suspicious of working with developers?
Yeah, I think from my time at City Hall, I've obviously led for housing and planning for the Greens at City Hall for the last 2 years, and I've been really quite dismayed at how we're sticking to a developer-led system that's not giving us the council homes or the affordable homes or the accessible homes that we really need. I recently published a report as an assembly member around our estate regeneration from across London, where people feel that they're left to rot for years and years as these estate regeneration projects don't deliver, and some people not being able to return because their service charges are too high. That's council tenants. So I do think there's a real problem in our housing system, which is the one that I really want to hold to account, like push developers to deliver more, but really get under the skin of some of these planning applications. And I know it's going to be difficult because the Mayor of London's recently changed the thresholds for the things that he can call it in, and how much housing developers have to deliver that's affordable. But this is a key plank of how we've seen Hackney change over the last few years, with lots and lots of unaffordable homes for Hackney residents. So my real commitment to Hackney residents is to get as many homes delivered as possible that they can afford to stay in. We've also committed to pushing for the pension funds to be used to buy back homes, so we can get family homes, big homes, back into use as quickly as possible. So no, I think I'm very sceptical of the developer-led model, and want to review the applications we've got in Hackney and the estate regeneration that's happened.
I suppose you are going to have limited money, though, right? I mean, I would love it if the central government put just billions into basically our local authorities and said, build shed loads of housing. It seems unlikely that that's going to happen soon, which means that, the extent to which you can sort of directly add housing stock to supply is going to be limited, to say the least. So I suppose, do you want more housing in Hackney in general, or are you just interested in tenure, I suppose, is where I'm getting to. And then I'm going to let my colleague Ash come in.
Yeah, so I think this is a really important question, because the government has put a target on London and on local boroughs to deliver housing without any tenure. And it's what I've been pushing the Mayor of London to do, is to put more grant funding towards the homes that we genuinely need. So that's accessible homes for our disabled residents, as well as genuinely affordable homes, so council homes. I want to make sure we can do as much within the London plan to max the local plan that feeds from the London plan to get the best housing possible from developers. And we know that administrations have changed, like in Wandsworth, where they reviewed all the planning applications and estate regeneration and renegotiated to get more affordable homes. You know, in Hackney, we've got residents pushing for a council-owned site to have more and more council housing, which originally the council said would be 0%. And after a community campaign went up to 27%. So I want to get in there and see what the modelling is around that. I'm very suspicious of viability assessments, which just hold up developer profit. So I want to bolster our planning team so they can really push back against viability assessments from developers. And like I said, there's ways that, you know, in our manifesto, we talked about supporting people to downsize. We know that a lot of people are just sent a link and a home swapper website a lot of the time and not given that like personal support to downsize their home. So we know that that can help free up some stock. And like I just said, pushing for the pension funds, which we know that councils like Kensington and Chelsea have used their pension funds to buy back homes and get them into council use. So yeah, it's about maximising all of those powers to deliver this.
Hey Zoe, I just want to ask a little bit more about the finances. So Hackney Council has been tasked with finding tens of millions of pounds worth of savings. Some of that got shaved off. They've been kept afloat with some government funding. Are the Greens in Hackney committed to a no-cuts budget in absolutely every circumstance, even if it means taking on more debt or sailing closer to bankruptcy, if that government funding doesn't turn up again and again in the financial years to come?
Yeah, so this has been a really important discussion for us here in Hackney with residents and loads of different organisations around what we will do in the financial situation. And we haven't pretended to people that austerity from the national government isn't going to continue. You know, I worked in councils in 2010 to 2016 and saw the beginnings of how much money was being extracted from local government. It's part of the reason why I'm a politician, to push back on that. So we've committed, so we inherit the budget that was agreed in March, and it's one of our first jobs is to look at that and see if that's what we want to deliver, if there's anything we need to do differently, because we'd put a budget amendment in as Greens. So we need to look at if we can implement any of those suggestions. Like we had one around bringing temporary accommodation in-house that would free up £1.2 million. So there's other things within our budget amendment that I'm going to see if we can get into this year. We're also committing to a anti-austerity summit, which is something that we want to do with other leaders from other boroughs, which I know that we've got Liam from Lewisham now, which is absolutely amazing. So I hope that we can work on that together, this anti-austerity summit that we want to do in the next few months, that's bringing together cross-party groups, political parties, different boroughs to push back against government austerity. I know that if we don't set a balanced budget, that the government has to come in and make those decisions for us. And I don't agree with taking more power out of the hands of Hackney residents. I'm completely committing to be transparent with residents and make those decisions with residents, because we've seen in Hackney that things like the cancelling of the Hackney Carnival got like absolutely buried in a cabinet report. And many people were told before the carnival community, and it was really devastating. So I'm not pretending it's not going to be difficult, but I need to get in there, see what the situation is, look at if we can deliver quickly on some of our promises, and then, you know, really be that organised, you know, with unions, with community groups, that loud voice to government on how austerity is still harming residents.
I suppose I just want to follow that thread a tiny bit further, because I'm imagining, God forbid, I'm in Keir Starmer's cabinet. And if I'm looking at a bunch of inner London boroughs going green, I'd be thinking, okay, well, the best thing I can do is restrict your access to government funding of the kind that's been just about keeping councils afloat, so that in the next 4 years, I get a bunch of green bankruptcy stories. How are you guys thinking about that kind of political use of funding as leverage? And do you have a plan in mind for it?
I mean, I think that would be devastating for the residents of Hackney, and I think that's a very worse kind of politics when that's how people are using funding when we've got 1 in 2 children in Hackney living in poverty. And I think that's what the Labour government needs to wake up to. Time and time again, their policies are really destroying residents' lives. Time and time again, the number of people on the doorstep who said that things are so difficult for them, I think they need to be really looking at this for a wake-up call about the state of this country and just the very desperate situations that people are living in. Like I said, I will be very responsible with the budget. I don't want to put us into a situation of being bankrupt. That's, I think, the worst nightmare for a council leader and wanting to have as much control over our budgets. I'm hoping to have a constructive relationship with councils from across London, working through London councils, obviously working with the Mayor of London in a different capacity to the one I have done on the London Assembly. And just working to make sure that we deliver the best for Hackney and secure as much funding as we can. But I think it will be interesting to see over the next few months and years how this is responded to.
And the Greens have come under a lot of attack over the past week. Do you think that damaged you at all, or do you think sort of the residents of Hackney aren't quite so fussed about some of the things that Zach has been attacked for over the past 7 days?
I think I'm overwhelmed by the amount of support that we've got today as mayor and the Greens we've had elected so far, which I think show a huge support for the Green Party. Zach's leadership has been a huge part of our success. Lots of people still talk about joining the party or coming out and voting based on a lot of the things he's done over the last kind of 6 months. I'm not going to, say that things haven't come up on the doorstep, but a lot of the time when we meet people with our values and explain how we are tackling kind of racism and anti-Semitism as a party, people are really reassured by that. So I think the more conversations we've been able to have with people on the doorstep and cut through some of the attacks and the noise on a national level has been really positive locally. And I think, the support for us speaks for itself.
Zoe Garbett, thank you so much for all of your time. We'll let you go and have some celebrations, presumably.
Thank you.
And bring back Hackney Carnival. I'm a fan of that.
Yes, it's in our manifesto.
Perfect, very good. I think we're actually going to go to a new Green Mayor, Liam Shrivastava, or another new Green Mayor. If we've got you there, Liam, thank you for joining us. Congratulations.
Hi, thank you so much, Michael.
Is anything in Lewisham going to be different to Hackney, or have you got any sort of special Lewisham-specific green policies that we should know about, or is it much of the same as what we've heard from Zoe?
I think there's a lot of alignment in terms of what me and Zoe think our communities need in our boroughs. And actually, there is a similarity in terms of Hackney Carnival. For many, many years, Lewisham had Lewisham People's Day, and it went away a number of years ago, largely sort of due to funding issues. They brought it back for one time in 2022 when I was first elected as councillor, and it never came back. And that's also something that we put in our manifesto. But obviously, in terms of the more sort of harder sort of serious policies, we also believe that we absolutely need more genuinely affordable housing for our communities. We have committed in our manifesto to deliver 1,000 homes for social rent. We also know from speaking to residents on the doorstep that things like fly tipping is a huge concern. So we definitely want to sort of prioritise that. And generally, I think sort of changing the culture within that local authority. Labour has been in power for basically half a century in Lewisham. We've broken that today, and we need to engender a different type of politics.
Apologies. Let's talk about the national picture while we have you. Obviously, the Greens doing very, very well in inner cities. I still do struggle to see how there is a sort of pathway over the next 3 years where the Greens do very well and we don't end up with a reform majority. Now, I'm not saying that to attack you. Obviously, we have a first-past-the-post system that you didn't choose. I assume you would like. I would like to have proportional representation. But is there sort of any scenario that you can imagine whereby a good showing for the Greens doesn't lead to a reform win the next time we have a general election? What would that look like?
Well, obviously, we're in the era of multi-party politics, and there's every chance that the next general election we could see, a number of parliamentary seats going to the Greens. Also, where the Lib Dems sort of continue to take seats off the Tories or sort of, build on their success from last time, where Labour, obviously potentially lose seats, certainly likely to lose seats, but, still have, more than 100 or so. So you could very much sort of end up in a sort of hung parliament territory, even if, Reform, along with the Tories, do get a sizable number of seats. Another thing as well is we need to see what actually happens with this Labour government. Obviously, Keir Starmer is having an absolutely disastrous set of results. And as we know, from what we've heard around, if someone such as Andy Burnham was to challenge him, he has said that he would want to include proportional representation in his sort of manifesto for government. So, we are, as I say, we're, going into that multi-party system. It's quite possible that, if we had a hung parliament or if we had some kind of sort of horse trading situation with a more progressive and grown-up prime minister, that we might actually see PR, to lock out the far right, basically, from taking power. So I think, it's more complicated than, what Labour would have you believe, which is this sort of version of hostage politics they're playing and saying, you mustn't vote Green because you'll let Reform in. That was not the case in Gorton and Denton. That is not the case in Lewisham. That's not the case in Hackney and many, many places. So, yeah, I think it's more nuanced and complex.
I want to put something to you, which is Kate Ferguson, who's the political editor of The Sun, tweeted earlier today something along the lines that Hackney went green because it's been gentrified. And there's been some argument about Twitter on it, yada, yada, yada. I want to ask you about Lewisham and ask you about who it was that you were encountering who could be tempted to go green. Is it, not necessarily an influx of millionaires to Lewisham, but is it downwardly mobile, socially progressive graduates? Or have you been able to bring on board, working class, black communities who traditionally have been very, very solidly for Labour?
Yeah, it's all of those things. We built an incredible voter coalition in Lewisham. And what we were finding, so my current ward, which I will no longer represent, but New Cross Gate, that's a mixed ward, as many are in Lewisham, but there's a fair amount of social housing there. There's a lot of working class black communities in New Cross Gate, and so many of them told us that they were voting Green. My colleague, Councillor Rudy Smith, who is a councillor in Evelyn ward, in sort of Deptford area, one of the most deprived wards in Lewisham, one of, a very high density of social housing, loads of tower blocks. And we were knocking those doors yesterday and so many people were telling us that they were voting Green. Yes, we were also getting that Green vote in the sort of leafier parts of places like Sydenham and Crofton Park, where I was also standing as a councillor candidate. But no, we've had a fantastic voting coalition, and that was obviously borne out in the results.
Liam Shrivastava, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Really appreciate it. We'll let you get to your celebrations as well. Congratulations on your result today.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks, guys.
Let's have another look at the overall picture as it is coming through. I can just see actually that Labour have held Camden, so that was one that the Greens would have been targeting. Labour have held Trafford. Can we get up a graphic of the current state of play? Potentially. No problem if not. Don't worry. Ash, your thoughts? Putting my cards, I saw someone in the comments there, Michael, putting in his Yimby hobby horse into these discussions. But I do think it matters, I suppose. I don't want to obsess about it because I know that our audience wants to hear about all different sorts of things. But London needs loads more homes. And I feel like whenever I hear all that's being said is it needs more affordable homes, partly it will become affordable building loads more of them. And I feel like there has been a bit of a shift on the American left with people like Zohran Mamdani saying they've really come around actually to kind of the left YIMBY position, which is, yes, we need more regulation to some degree. We need more social housing, but also we really need to just build as much housing as possible by any means necessary, which is kind of his position. And I feel like the UK left isn't quite in that place yet. And as a Hackney resident, who one day might want to own a home. You know, I would be reassured if I was hearing something more along those lines.
I think it's got to be a yes and, right? So yes, you obviously want more council housing. You want there to be genuinely affordable housing going up. And yes, you also will probably want to work with developers so you can just get a critical mass of housing in there. So that also does something about house prices. I don't think, though, and this is why I'm not one of those people that thinks building alone can fix it, is that if you've got the people who are best positioned to buy and they're either extremely well off because they've inherited from middle-class parents or because they're landlords with a private property portfolio and they go, thank you, I'll have that, you know, I'll just gobble up this housing stock, then you're sort of back in similar problems.
Well, so they have, so my issue is that and we won't spend too long on this, don't worry, but my issue is if wealthy people want to move to that borough, they're either going to compete for new housing stock or they're going to compete for existing housing stock.
But my point is this, is that I think that you need to have basically fairly tight restrictions on landlords buying up new housing stock, right? I think you need to do that. I think if you've got new housing stock, you say, all right, we actually want this to be for families, people who are going to move in. Sure, like there's very little that you can necessarily do about people from middle-class families who've come into inheritance and, you know, they're able to jump ahead of someone who's been scrimping and saving their deposit whilst renting at the same time. There's not as much you can do about that. I think that's when you have to look at, all right, so tenure really matters. Council housing really matters. Widening council homes accessibility outside of people who are just in the most dire situations. Obviously, they get priority, but what you want is for council housing to be an option for, you know, people who are in stable work, got families, blah, blah, blah. You need both of those things at once. So I'm a YIMBY on building. I'm a NIMBY on landlords.
Yeah, we'll have a proper YIMBY-NIMBY debate at some point, but it would probably be a distraction on such a momentous day in British politics. Is this in front of me because we are going to show the overall picture? Perfect. Let's have a look at where we currently stand. So Labour, at this point in time, have lost 633 seats. The Conservatives have lost 301. The Lib Dems have gained 45. Reform have gained 915. The Greens have gained 140. So that's a big improvement since we last showed you that, largely because some of those big London councils are coming in. And we can have another look at the current state of councils across England. So what do we got here? This is councillors. Maybe we can see councils, but don't worry if not, we can move on to our next deep dive. And we're going to look at the North West now. The North West has, for more than a century, been a Labour stronghold, but they were walloped in Thursday's elections. And the story had two major parts. In elections to Manchester City Council, Labour lost seats to the Greens. So of the 32 seats up for election, Labour lost 24. Of those, the Greens gained 17 seats, with Reform up 7. But in the outer boroughs of Greater Manchester, the small towns in Greater Manchester, it was Reform who were the big winners. So in Tameside, which includes Angela Rayner and Jonathan Reynolds' constituencies, Labour lost 14 out of 15 seats it was defending to Reform. And Reform gained a total of 18 seats, winning 2 from the Tories and Independents, respectively, as well as the ones they won from Labour. In Wigan, which is Lisa Nandy's seat, Labour lost all 20 seats it was defending to Reform. Catastrophic. Reform gained 23 seats in total. They won 24 of the 25 seats up for election. Meanwhile, Labour also got hammered in Salford, losing 13 seats in total, 11 to Reform and 2 to the Greens. Reform also won 13 of 20 seats up for election in Oldham, 9 of the 20 seats contested in Bolton. And the story for Labour in the Liverpool region was no better. So Liverpool City Council didn't have elections. They'll be having all-out elections next year. But there were some elections in Liverpool City region, and in those, Labour were decimated. So in Halton, Labour lost 16 seats to Reform, holding only 2 of the seats they were defending. And the swings were pretty wild. So look at this. This is the ward of Ditton Hale Village and Hale Bank ward. Reform went from nothing, because it didn't stand in the last election, to 53%. So an absolute majority in the ward. So this wasn't about a split progressive vote. This was Reform going from 0 to 53. And Labour went from a kind of North Korea-style 80% of the vote 4 years ago down to 29% today. So that is quite the swing. Knowsley was slightly less disastrous for Labour. They lost 4 seats to Reform, but held on to 3 and even gained 1. I don't know, maybe that was Labour's only gain on the whole night, I'm not sure. The Greens also had a decent night, gaining a seat from Labour and holding on to 2 others. That was in Knowsley. Labour also held seats in St Helens, but lost to Reform elsewhere. These are all boroughs on the outskirts of Liverpool City, or sort of satellite towns. Now, to get a better sense of the political earthquake in the northwest, I spoke earlier to Jonny Ball. He's contributing editor at Unheard. He's based in Liverpool.
Yeah, we're talking about, particularly where I'm from, Merseyside being the sort of citadel of the Labour Party for quite a long time. Sometimes it's slightly overstated, the longevity of these trends. But certainly in Greater Manchester, places like Wigan, places like Preston, as well as Merseyside, they're considered bastions of the Labour movement. It's not just the Labour Party, but of kind of industrial trade unionism, industrial militancy. The Industrial Revolution obviously started in this neck of the woods, and with it came the workers' movement and the Labour movement. So these are, if anywhere is a heartland, then these are the heartlands. And yeah, perhaps in more recent times, heartlands came to be seen as more the sort of the big cities, London, Manchester, Liverpool included. But at least until today, it was also considered those sort of slightly smaller cities and smaller towns that acted as a sort of satellite to those metropoles, the sort of post-industrial Red Wall, if you like. And yeah, it's a sea change in the politics, in the local politics of those places. There's no doubt about it.
And I mean, there seems like a big division in the region between the cities and the towns. I'm sure we'll see this across the UK. So Labour losing Manchester City to the Greens, but the rest of Greater Manchester going to Reform, essentially. Liverpool City didn't vote. They're voting next year, but it's those sort of Liverpool boroughs on the outskirts that are going to Reform. I mean, is it as simple as saying the inner cities, so Manchester is renters, students, ethnic minorities, and then Wigan or Bolton is older white working class people? Is that as much sociology as we need to understand these votes, or is it a bit more complicated than that?
I mean, that is the broad dynamic. I suppose you summed it up pretty well, but there's always exceptions to prove every rule. And I think, it'd be dangerous to go to one of these local authority areas because Reform have done well and suddenly, go to Tameside and say, oh, this is full of white working class, sort of white van men who are sort of really anti-small boats and sort of love Nigel Farage as like the second coming, because Reform are winning these seats with really slim majorities often. So, often you'll have a majority of voters who didn't vote Reform, and that's just testament to the national story of having such a fragmented electorate, 5, or in the case of Wales and Scotland, because they have the sort of nationalist element, 5 or 6 parties who are competing in a first past the post system. So, you can really go to town with 22, 23, 24, 25% of the vote. Absolutely, take the whole board of seats on that relatively small sliver of support. Demographically, if you were going to generalise, that is the way the chips are falling. Where I am, Liverpool, we like, as you say, we didn't vote. We like to think of ourselves as slightly different in these respects, like a bit sort of immune to. It's a working class city. It's much whiter than London, much whiter than Manchester, much whiter than Birmingham. So white working class city, strong Labour traditions. And we like to think of ourselves as slightly immune from these trends, going towards Reform, anti-migrant hostility, etc. We won't know until next year, 2027, is when we go to the polls. But the outskirts of Liverpool, certainly on proving our exceptionality, if you will, they're conforming to the national trends. You have the more kind of outer Liverpool boroughs trending rightwards. And my feeling is that next year, particularly if Starmer is still PM and leader of the Labour Party, so despised, that within Liverpool proper, the city of Liverpool, where I'm based now, the south end will go towards the Green Party. It's a slightly more diverse, more young professionals, more studenty, more established migrant communities, more public sector professionals, slightly leafier, richer, house prices are higher. And the north end will be dragged, which is slightly poorer. It's where Everton and Anfield are, very white working class, very deprived, some of the most deprived wards in the country, and they'll go towards Reform. That's my prediction for Liverpool next year. It won't be immune as some sort of red citadel. There's no such thing anymore.
And it does seem to be, because I mean, across the country, there's going to be this debate. Did Reform make gains because the progressive vote was split between Labour and the Greens, or did Reform make gains because, to some degree, the electorate has moved to the right? And I was going through, in Salford, it is kind of a story that the progressive vote was split. In Tameside, in Wigan, going through the results, I mean, Reform got over 50% in a lot of those seats. So there is just a significant shift to the right, sort of across the country, outside of major cities, even in parts of the world which were once seen as sort of just really red. The idea that Wigan is not sort of Manchester city centre, but it is somewhere that we've historically sort of thought of as being, a very, very safe Labour seat. Is it over? Is there any way that Labour can win this back?
Yeah, so Wigan is absolutely, central in the sort of Labour movement's collective imagination, I suppose. Lisa Nandy's seats there. Tameside, that's Angela Rayner's constituency. So, if Angela Rayner was to take over from Kiera, then she'd have to really think about how she was going to retain her seat come a general election rather than be decapitated as a new sort of Labour PM. In terms of where the Labour vote is going, polling-wise, it's going towards the Greens. I mean, of course, some of it is shifting towards Reform. There's no doubt about it. The vast majority of Labour votes, though, are going towards the Liberal Democrats and the Greens. And what's happening is the Reform Party are sort of coming in through the middle, coming through the back door, if you like, because the progressive vote has been split. Someone like Andy Burnham might be able to remedy that. A much more charismatic, relatable, likeable, less sort of technocratic and buttoned-up figure than Keir Starmer. He might be able to come in and run a kind of, a good comms operation that kind of gives out a sort of well-meaning positive message of progressive alliance, a stop Nigel, a not Nigel vote that kind of brings those sort of green Polanski-curious people back into the fold, and also a few Lib Dems. And also he's just sort of a bit of a unicorn politician in the sense that he can also attract a few reform voters as well. He has that kind of unique sort of personal charisma, I suppose. Having said that, of course, he's not in Parliament. Maybe that'll change over the coming weeks. There's obviously talk about him being sort of parachuted in to a Labour backbencher seat in Liverpool, the Northwest Manchester, Greater Manchester, in order that he can challenge Keir Starmer in due course. Some people are saying that it wouldn't be possible for him to get a safe Manchester or a safe Labour seat because there's no such thing. I largely agree with that. I'd be wary of saying that any Labour candidate could win a seat in Greater Manchester or Liverpool. But as I say, Andy Burnham is a bit of a unicorn politician. His personal popularity and people's personal loyalties to him as a politician transcends people's thoughts about the Labour Party specifically. So I don't think it would be an issue him getting back into Parliament if he were allowed to stand, which Keir Starmer, of course, blocked him from doing the first time and would be likely to do so again. So in my mind, that would be Labour's best route back would be getting Burnham into Parliament and running a very kind of broad anti-Nigel, not Nigel campaign that tries to bring Green voters and a few Reform voters back into the fold by having quite a sort of loose, woolly, positive, progressive, patriotic alliance message, basically.
Jonny Ball, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Michael. Cheers. Nice one.
That was Jonny Ball speaking to our very own Michael Walker earlier today. Ash, by the way, it's not Michael Walker anymore, it's Sam Bastani.
Yes, we killed and ate him.
Yeah, he was just, he was just being too yimby. We had enough. Off you trot. Just joking, of course. Michael will be joining us in a while, just taking a much-deserved rest. What are you thinking about the state of play so far?
So I was really intrigued by what was being said about Andy Burnham towards the end. So Jonny was basically saying that's Labour's way through. He'll be able to, through his sort of force of personality, the personal affiliation people have towards him as a politician, which transcends the Labour Party brand, that plus a different orientation. He's much less anti-green, much less sceptical of a progressive alliance. He's pro electoral reform and proportional reputation, all those things, he's the guy who might be able to stem Labour's losses in the Northwest and also to bring together a sort of stop Farage vote. I also think that there's another element of Andy Burnham which is really missing from the other floated runners and riders. So I'm thinking of Angela Rayner and Wes Streeting, which is obviously Angela Rayner offers a very different kind of personality to Keir Starmer. Wes Streeting, I'm not sure you can necessarily say that at all, but she's a very different kind of personality. I think that's reducing the issue with Labour to a comms issue. The real problem is that they've got no theory of change whatsoever. Certainly nothing coherent. So everything that they've been coming out with publicly for the past 3 years has just been, growth, 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 no matter what the external environment is like. So when you've got insane energy bills, or when you've got the US imposing swinging tariffs everywhere, or war in Iran, you're still talking about growth like a broken record, but you haven't kept up with the way in which the world is evolving. Andy Burnham, while he hasn't necessarily weighed in on every single national or international issue, he has at least shown signs of having a bit of a theory of change. He says the reason why we have so much political volatility is because first past the post and because we're too disciplined by the bond markets. Never in a month of Sundays would you hear Angela Rayner saying something like that, or indeed Wes Streeting. So I also think that that's what puts him above the other potential competitors within the Labour Party as it stands.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. It's easy to say growth, 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 but when there isn't any growth, okay, Kiera, let's say there's no growth for 18 months, what are you going to do to win political consent? And it's quite clear from the Labour project, they don't have a plan. And that is a problem. We're seeing it play out in real time. Before we go on to our next story, and it's a huge story, it's a story of Wales. In many ways, I think the biggest story actually of all of this, historically speaking, it's just enormous. Before we go to that, you know what I'm going to say. We've got almost 5,000 of you watching. We cannot exist without the generosity, the kindness, the public-spirited nature of our supporters. Why not help us build a new media for different politics? Heaven knows we're going to build one anyway, but we're going to need one anyway between now and 2030. We are doing journalism in a different kind of way here at Novara Media. You might have seen some of the stuff we made ahead of these elections. I went to Wales myself. I went to Birmingham. I thought they were quite good. I thought the show has been brilliant. This show has been fabulous. We've got a great team here. It costs money to put it all together. Michael and Ash, the best of the best, right? We're very lucky to have them to help us grow and meet the very real needs that are facing us in terms of the British media landscape. Go to novaramedia.com/support, novara.media/support. Help us build that new media for different politics. We're going to Wales next, where history is being made right now as Labour is almost completely wiped out of the Senedd.
So Greens have got 2 out of the 3.
We should have a video coming. We don't. We'll get it up. We'll get it up. There's a lot to talk about.
Before we do that, can I quickly signal something? So as you know, I've been keeping a very close eye on Haringey. It is the cradle of civilization. It is also where I live. So it's a tight race for the council, and the Greens only had 1 councillor as of last year. The results for the White Hart Lane ward, obviously very close to my heart, have just come in. Greens got 2 out of 3. Now, for all of the talk being pushed by Labour and also by some political commentators that the Greens have basically been a beneficiary of gentrification, that is not the case in White Hart Lane ward. So 2 out of 3 normally be the kind of place where Labour would be, weighing their votes by the kilo. I think that's a sign of, the recomposed Green vote. It's something playing out in miniature in this little corner of Tottenham, but I think that's part of what you're seeing nationally.
I look forward to the big house pundits with multi-million-pound properties in West London called Tottenham, gentrifying and affluent. We do
leafy Tottenham.
Leafy Tottenham. Leafy affluent Tottenham. They even have a pret-a-manger. We do have that video referring to Wales once more. And like I say, Labour is almost completely wiped out in the Senedd.
This is over 100 years of winning in Wales ends today. We have a lot of lessons to learn. It is important that we take the time to reflect on that. I will be stepping down as leader of the Labour Party in Wales. There will be a need for us to ask some very serious questions about where we go in future. We've heard the people of Wales and we will need to respond. I was very clear that Keir Starmer was not standing in this election. I was standing and I'm taking responsibility.
Was he a problem for you?
There are clearly lessons for the Labour Party locally and nationally. We can see across the whole of the United Kingdom that people are rejecting the Labour Party. There are lessons for the Prime Minister. It is clear that he needs to think about focusing, I think, on the working classes to make sure that we see a better redistribution of wealth across our nation. And I'm very keen to make sure that we hear the people of Wales and the rest of the United Kingdom and that we respond.
That was Labour First Minister for Wales, Eleanor Morgan, speaking after losing her seat after a decade in the Senedd. And Welsh Labour as a whole conceded defeat before 3 p.m. this afternoon after a surge in support for Plaid Cymru and reform. We now have the full results for the Senedd. Plaid Cymru is by far the largest party with 43 seats. Reform is second, but it's not nearly as close as some expected. They've won 34 seats. Also in terms of vote share, quite a lot in it. And then there's Labour with just 9 seats, less than 10% of the total. And the Greens have won 2 seats. Of course, they have won their first ever members of the Senedd. Turnout in this election is thought to have been huge, topping 50% for the first time in Welsh electoral history. That's very high by the standards of the Principality and these elections to Cardiff Bay. And the aim of the electorate appeared to be toppling Labour MSs. At the last Senedd elections, they won 30 seats, half of the 60 available. That was up 1, incidentally. Since then, the Senedd has reformed, increasing the number of seats to 96. That means Labour will hold less than 10% of seats in the next Senedd, and that's after more than 100 years of dominating Welsh politics. This is really important, and I said at the top of this when I came in to substitute for Michael, this is in many ways the big story of the day. Labour, Welsh Labour, has been the largest party in every election to Westminster since 1922. 104 years. It has been the largest party in every single election to the Senedd since its inception in the last 27 years. The collapse of Labour in Wales is truly historic. In Casnewid, Islwyn, Reform and Plaid were fairly even on the vote share, winning 2 seats each in the Senedd. One of them goes to Reform's leader in Wales, Dan Thomas. Labour and the Tories each won a seat there too. We don't have a video which we want to play. Maybe we'll have it shortly. Ash, in terms of Wales, I want to know your thoughts on this, actually. I think this is really, really interesting. Often it's viewed as something which is unrelated to English, Scottish politics. But actually, in microcosm, this could be the next general election, right? Because you've seen the collapse of the 2 major parties. I mean, this is extraordinary. The 2 big parties now in the Senedd are Reform and Plaid Cymru. So you've got British nationalism on one side, Welsh nationalism on the other. It feels like we might be prefiguring 2029, 2028 at Westminster.
I think there are some ways in which you can say this is mimicking the national picture, but there's also some things which are super duper specific. So when you're thinking about Plaid as opposed to the Greens, right? So the Greens, I think, are themselves shocked by the gains they've been making. For Plaid, this is historic. I mean, they've essentially broken down a century-old monopoly on Welsh politics. But you get the sense that this is what they've been preparing for, this is what they've been planning for, and it's not nearly as surprising for Plaid Cymru as it is for the Greens in London that they're going to find themselves in charge of elements of government. The second thing is that there is something unique in the dysfunction of Welsh Labour post Mark Drakeford. So Vaughan Gething, who you may remember was First Minister for about 5 seconds before being brought down ignominiously. That tarnishing of the Labour brand that you've been seeing all over England, something which has been particularly pronounced in, the like post-industrial former heartlands. Obviously, that's played out in Wales, but there has also been a specific story about corruption, incompetence, and complacency. And so Plaid have positioned themselves very, very well there. And I do think that, to come back to what you were saying about you've got English nationalism on one side and you've got Welsh nationalism on the other, is that I think it's a mistake to think of these things as moral equivalents, because they're not. What you've seen, north of the border in Scotland and in Wales is a form of civic nationalism, which is very inclusive, right? And the sort of centering of Welsh nationalism around language and culture in a way which anyone can participate in is very different from the sort of flirtation with blood and soil that's been occurring in parts of Reform, and I would also say Restore Britain as well. And so I think that there needs to be a sort of serious conversation, not about progressive patriotism and, do you wrap yourself up in the flag or whatever in England? Because I think people can tell when your heart's not in it and, something's inauthentic. So when Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper were festooned in St George's bunting, everyone's like, come on, come off it. But there's something real there about culture, whether that's, intangible forms of cultural expression or tangible ones, material forms of culture. I think that Plaid Cymru and Welsh nationalists in general have taken that very seriously in a way that we don't think about that in England so much. I think because we get so sidetracked into a debate around progressive patriotism rather than what are forms of national expression that are real, tangible, and inclusive.
It's a very abstract debate in England, right? Often with the left. I should say, just sticking on this for a moment, the difference between England and Wales on this, we've spoken to some people from Plaid, the leader of Plaid Cymru, and something I noticed personally was that they reminded me of the SNP sort of 15 years ago. And I remember when the SNP started to break through in the early, before 2010, but in the early 2010s, it was clear that they were now a really powerful force in Scottish politics. And Adam Ramsey, friend of the show, said that, you have to understand the SNP are kind of like New Labour just without the war. But a pre-2003 New Labour vibe. And I feel like Plaid are trying to channel that a little bit. So they're technocrats. They're saying we're technocrats. We're going to administer the country calmly, effectively, for a term, and then we'll return to this question of the Welsh nation and a referendum. I think it's really interesting that they said we're not going to do a referendum in this first term. That's off the agenda. We want to prove the legitimacy of the Senedd as a place you can trust to run Wales. Right now, that's in short supply.
I spoke to Peter Mertens, who's the General Secretary of the Belgian Workers' Party, earlier this week. Interview's going to come out with Downstream this Sunday. And he really reminded me of like a European football manager who's quietly doing mad things with tiki-taka in some, lower division in the Netherlands or something. One of the things he said is that in politics, you cannot play football, like all 11 men are rushing for the goal at once. Like, you can't do that. You have to strategically prioritize. There's a balance to be struck then, which is you sort of get the feeling that the Scottish referendum was just mistimed. Yeah. That had it been a year later, post-Brexit, you'd be looking at a different result, and that also the SNP would be less burdened by incumbency than it is now. The struggle to still present itself as a fresh alternative to Westminster politics. But that timing is everything. Establishing credibility, establishing seriousness in the administration of the state, and then going for the big populist thing you want to do.
Let's go to this video now. This was new MS Dan Thomas speaking after the result.
And in just 5 years, Reform has gone from winning 1% of the vote in these Senedd elections to being the main contender for government, smashing Labour in the process. It has taken Plaid Cymru decades to come anywhere near to the same. The momentum is with Reform because we are the people's army. We will remember the people who elected us and what they've told us during this campaign. And whether you voted for us or not, we will serve all our constituents equally and with dedication. Labour's historic demise in their heartland is a lesson for all politicians to never forget the people who elected you. We must always work for the people, not against them.
It's Plaid Cymru that's benefited the most from that collapse. In Caerdydd Penarth, Cardiff West in English, there were 6 seats up for grabs. Plaid was victorious, winning 3. But that was also where the Greens made their first breakthrough, with Welsh Green leader Anthony Slaughter winning a seat as well, therefore becoming the first Green MS in the Senedd. This was Mr Slaughter speaking after that victory.
It's incredible, it's exciting. This is a historic breakthrough. This changes things for good in Welsh politics. Having Green voice in that Senedd makes all the difference. I'm over the moon, so grateful to all those campaigners who've worked so hard over the years to make this happen. And with other results coming in from London and Scotland, we're seeing that people across these islands are ready for Green politics. They're ready for the politics of hope.
Also winning a Senedd seat in that Cardiff West election was our next guest, Kiera Marshall of Plaid Cymru. Kiera, how are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. A crazy day.
I bet it's crazy. Have you had much sleep?
No, not much. We were going until polls closed yesterday and then up at like 6 a.m. this morning, basically.
Wow. Listen, you've got a lot on your plate starting from next week, but I just want to know, how are Plaid looking to play this first 100 days of the administration? It's something we asked the incoming mayor for Hackney. It's something that was clearly fluffed very badly by Keir Starmer and Labour. This first act of applied administration, are there going to be any sort of flagship policies, any moments? What should we expect?
Yeah, well, I think we're getting started straight away. We've got a meeting with all our new members of the Senedd tomorrow to sort of pin down exactly what that's going to look like. We want to get sworn in straight away so we can start getting staff and getting started and, working on things like our universal free childcare offer, for example. And and just getting going from the start straight away this week, hopefully.
Have we lost Kiera?
Goes on, but we're going to hit the ground running, that's for sure.
We've got a poor connection, Kiera, but I do want to ask you another important question, I think. Do you think this is the high point for reform in Welsh politics? Because they've kind of underwhelmed a little bit. They're disappointed a little bit. There were some people saying they might be the largest party in the Senedd. Plaid have comprehensively beaten them both in terms of MSs, but also the popular vote. Well, what's your view about reform in Wales? There's an argument that Nigel Farage, Richard Tice, they're going to want to focus on England now. This clearly hasn't paid off the kind of dividends that they'd expect. They're not going to ignore it, but it's not going to be a target like it was perhaps over the last couple of months.
Yeah, I think they gave up, a few weeks off the end of the campaign, really. I didn't see much ground campaign for them. We weren't seeing much social media campaigning for them. And I think this was a step for our to number 10. I don't think it's serious interest or care to see that now in the sort of more national picture, how reform treat Wales and what that looks like at a UK level. But yeah, I think they haven't underperformed to what the hype was as well. And I think it just shows that bots can't vote. They're very loud on social media. They weren't so loud on the doors. And it's a great result.
I like that line, bots can't vote. Before I let you go, what next for Welsh Labour? This is in some ways the most successful political entity in these islands over the last century. Where do you think they go next?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really, really difficult one for them because I think they're divided within themselves. We've seen Alan Davies in Blaenau Gwent Cyfili Rymney, who's just lost his seat, calling for Keir Starmer to resign. The First Minister or previous First Minister who's just stepped down wouldn't quite do the same. So I don't think, I don't think they know where the blame is yet, or I don't think they've taken accountability there. Or that perhaps it's actually on both Welsh Labour and UK Labour that they've together betrayed people in Wales. And I don't know how they come back from that at the minute. And I think we've got our position and actually we're going to do better than them. We're going to bring the Welsh people with us. And that devolution does work. It just wasn't the right people running it.
That's the argument you've got to make and, of course, win. Kiera, we'll let you go. Get some rest.
Yeah.
See you later.
Thank you. Thank you.
That was Kiera, Marshall of Plaid, Cymru. Such an impressive woman, by the way. I think she's 28. I spoke to her when I went up there recently. She's 28 years old, mum. She went to the LSE from a council estate in Swansea. Talking to her, I just thought, the fact that Welsh Labour don't have you as a candidate says so much about them and their politics.
But I think this is a part of understanding the decrepitude of the Labour machine, right? So when you go, how is it that everywhere you turn, Labour are hemorrhaging seats? England, London, Wales, Scotland, wherever you look. I think a big part of it is that there is such a throttle, a stranglehold on who gets to be a candidate. So you can have quite clearly an excellent communicator, like someone who's serious, someone who's considered, someone who's strategic, like Kiera. And is she going to make it past a selection process, which values, patronage networks, both within the community and within the party and the trade union movement as well? Will they make it past the National Executive Committee, which has been filtering for politics? Because if Andy Burnham can't get a seat in a Greater Manchester by-election, think about how often that picture is being replicated down the list. Yeah. And I think that that's when, I do a lot of media, I encounter a lot of Labour MPs, and, there are some great ones, and, there are obviously lots of great Labour councillors, many of whom who will have lost their seats. But a lot of the time I meet a Labour MP and I go, I'm surprised you manage breakfast every day. Yeah. Because I just don't see signs of life behind the eyes in a way which is actually really different from encountering Conservative politicians, for instance. And so I think that there is something which factionalism does. When you have such a factional stranglehold on candidate selection, you end up with either factional headbangers, the Labour Together death commandos, or mediocrity.
Yeah. That moment of Burnham being rejected, not being allowed to stand in Gorton and Denton, there was a subcommittee of the NEC, 8-1 said no. I mean, Lemmings doesn't do it justice, right? You are signing your death warrant as a party. I think that's pretty clear to them now. It certainly wasn't back then.
And just to say, Plaid have been preparing for this moment for decades.
Yeah.
So you've got these two things interacting with each other, right? You've got Labour complacency, Labour death drive. And then you've also got Plaid's preparation and the excellence of their candidate selection.
Yeah. I mean, look, isn't it interesting? Kiera is a Plaid representative now. The Labour Party blocked Faiza Shaheen. Very similar actually, right? I think both really inspiring, impressive women. Labour don't want impressive people. They want people that say yes. Isn't it fascinating? They've got more than 400 MPs. The Prime Minister is terrible. We can't replace him with anyone. 2 years ago, they were saying, we're only filtering for the highest possible candidates. Now they're saying, well, there's several hundred people, but actually none of them can replace this guy who's frankly awful at the job. One thing you might be wondering is, where are the Tories today? Good question. Beside being at the bottom of most electoral races, they've been doing a bit of media.
What did we say? We said Conservatives are coming back, and here we are. Yay! We have done brilliantly in Westminster. We have taken back Wandsworth. People said no one even expected anything to happen in Wandsworth. Wandsworth is now under Conservative control. You look at...
Did you think that we were going to hold on to Bexley, Fareham and Harlow? Did you think we were going to take back Westminster and have the biggest group in Wandsworth? We are beginning to make progress, but we've got a hell of a long way to go. We've got a cracking leader who's making a real pitch to the British public. We've got to carry
you're just in denial, aren't you?
Listening to the public,
let me tell you, someone who's had to listen to this for most of his life from people in your positions, being in denial is not a good start. Because the way you fight back is to realise, let me finish, is to realise how drastic your situation is, why you're in that situation, and begin a long, slow fight back. At the moment, the Tories are reduced to a rump. You're a regional party, you have no national reach, and you have no chance on these figures of coming close to winning the next election.
I've fought my way back. There's nothing wrong. You should have no shame because you want more overall housing supply in major cities. So I'm back. I'm not ashamed. Aaron Bastani has switched chair. The Tories. I mean, the big story of today is obviously Labour. Labour's collapse. Kemi Badenoch, people have been saying positive things about her recently. is not really borne out in these results, is it?
People, I mean, you say people. A couple of hundred people inside SW1 have been saying positive things about her. I think for the rest of the country, she hasn't really landed. Some people have mildly sympathetic things to say, but they still have no intention of voting for the Conservative Party. I think you're right. The number one story today, without a doubt, is obviously the rise of Reform, the collapse of Labour. But we shouldn't sleep on what's happening to the Conservatives. This was, as Ash said at the start of the show, this has been one of the most successful political entities in Western history. It was the default party of government from 2010 until 2024. And what we're seeing now isn't just defeat, loss, and a backsliding, it's irrelevance. You know, I was looking at, my wife is a councillor in Portsmouth where we live, and she was just showing me the tellers, because they sit, as people will know, I'm sure, they sit and they ask you who you're planning to vote for, so they have some indication of you know, which ward is going which way. And she was showing me the notes, and I'm just looking at these, you know, and it's Tories, 1, 2, 3, and it's Reform, 30, 40, 50, Labour, 25, Lib Dems, 40, and Tory, 1, 2, 3. And I'm looking ward after ward, and I'm saying, this can't be right. This is crazy. The results come through, and lo and behold, that was the case. And this is a city where there was a Tory MP until 2024. So we are looking at something truly extraordinary. It's one thing to see a historic party collapse, but for two to be happening at the same time is something really, it's unprecedented. Of course, 100 years ago, it happened with the Liberals. So we've been here before as a country. But like I say, two at the same time, this is uncharted territory.
And the wins, I mean, they were way for Finn, but the wins sort of at the top of my head, Wandsworth, because a good friend of mine, you know, was head of housing, has now lost his job, gone to the Tories. He was very good. They were building lots of council housing, but it's returned to the Tories. Westminster has also returned to the Tories. We're quite used to sort of in the discourse talking about how Labour is confined to inner cities and the rest of the country votes Tory. Now the rest of the country votes Reform. And the Tories now, like, if the Tories are pointing to what's their positive story for today, it's that they've won back some inner city seats, which kind of goes against the narrative. I'm not quite sure how to sort of fit that into the story of the electoral sociology of Britain.
It's a great point. Look, there's a niche for the Conservative Party, right? It's to be pro-market, centre-right, aspirational party. The kind of Cameron thing, not necessarily the social liberal side of that, that's up to them. I think that probably is wise, given Reform have really cornered the market on the social conservatism. But certainly on the economic offer, you know, I think they should be YIMBY. Goodness knows the Reform Party is going to be very NIMBY with power. So I think it's a good niche for them, but of course that niche isn't really going to be more than maybe 50, 60 seats at a general election. But maybe, you know, this is just a moment for them where they need to reflect. I'll finish with this as well. You know, I had a Tory contact get in touch with me saying, actually, it's good if Reform get a majority because they'll be disastrous. What we don't want, what we wouldn't want is to be in a coalition with them.
Is to prop them up.
Is to prop them up, exactly. I prefer this in a way, which, you know, I think maybe is being a bit contrary, but there's something to that.
Yeah, I mean, I can see how for the Tories propping up Reform would be the worst outcome of all, because it's also humiliating, isn't it? Let's take another look at the overall picture. So these are our live results. Labour down on 6-9, or down 699. The Tories down 300. Lib Dems up 48. Reform up 970. The Greens up 160. They keep on rising. And I'm not going to read out other because it doesn't make any sense really as a category. Let's take another look at the current state of the councils. Across England, Labour have lost 22, the Conservatives have lost 5, the Lib Dems have gained 1, Reform have gained 9, and the Greens have gained 3. Let's go on to Scotland. In Scotland's national elections, the SNP claimed victory earlier this evening, with leader John Swinney certain the Nationalists would once more be the largest party in Holyrood. So this is what's been declared so far. So this is only the constituencies. So you have constituency representatives, and then you have representatives from the regions. And of the constituencies, you can see the SNP have won the vast majority of them. So they are on 55, the Lib Dems on 6, the Conservatives on 4, Labour on 3, and the Greens on 2. Reform, interestingly, on 0 when it comes to the constituencies. But when those regional votes come in and are totted up, they are sure to be on a larger figure than that. I'll be asking our expert guest about this in one moment. Scottish leader Labour Anas Sarwar was quick to concede defeat.
You've lost this election, and do you blame the Prime Minister for that?
This is clearly a disappointing result for us as a Scottish Labour Party. We argued the case for change, made the argument for change, but ultimately it's an argument we lost. But I want to say thank you to our fantastic candidates, our activists, and all those people right across the country who vote for us and voted for us.
Do you blame the Prime Minister?
Look, throughout this election campaign, I have tried to make this election about Scotland. I'm not going to change that today. Is there a national wave, though, that we tried to overcome but failed to do so? Yes, but right now my focus is on what this election means for
Do you
Scotland.
reiterate your call for him to resign? Does he need to take responsibility?
I said what I said back in February, and I stand by that, but I'm going to focus on what this means for my party here in Scotland.
Just to update you, we just realised we've been getting our figures from The Guardian, who are a bit behind the BBC. So actually, Labour have lost 1,100 so far. Reform are up 1,200. The Greens up 293. The Lib Dems up 93. The Conservatives 473. They are down. Now, of course, you know, if we're using The Guardian figures, we can't really complain that they didn't update them. But we should have been looking at the BBC. So the gains and the losses slightly more dramatic than we had told you one moment ago. SNP John Swinney, sort of following on from what Anas Sarwar said there, was also asked about the Prime Minister.
Do you think that the Prime Minister should be considering his position? Do you want to be dealing with a different individual in number 10, and do you think that would be best for the United Kingdom?
Well, it's up to the Labour Party to decide who their leadership are, but the leader of the Labour Party in Scotland has called for Keir Starmer to resign. He called for him to resign some time ago, and I think looking at the electoral implications of the elections south of the border, and from what I understand is beginning to emerge from some of the speculation about Wales, it's clear the Labour Party is in a very bad place under the leadership of Keir Starmer, and I don't think he can govern or lead effectively in such a weakened position.
Now, it's not clear if the SNP are going to win a majority. Obviously, that means it's an open question as to the prospect of an independence vote this term. Swinney was asked about that on the BBC.
Lorna Slayton, Scottish Green Party, 12,000.
If, as it appears, as John Curtis is predicting, that you don't make it to an overall majority, it seems that's incredibly unlikely now, unless something very strange happens in the hours to come. Will you say openly now that you will not pursue the chance of having another independence referendum?
Well, I'll wait and see what the outcome of the election is and to see what the final tally is from the election contest. But what I'm pleased about is that the Scottish National Party is emerging as by far the leading party in Scottish politics, which is a huge achievement after 19 years in office. And I look forward to offering myself to serve the people of Scotland in the parliamentary term to come.
But you know that voters will be listening very carefully to you now, that if that majority does not come your way. You said clearly in the campaign if there was a majority you would pursue a referendum. It looks like that's not going to be the case. So will you stand good by that vow that you made to people? If the majority is not there, you won't reopen the constitutional question.
People know that I'm a supporter of Scottish independence. It's what is at the heart of my political objectives. So we will carefully consider the outcome of the election and set out to people what steps that we will take.
That was John Swinney. If you were wondering why we were showing you that footage of the guy dressed as a chicken, it wasn't, John Swinney wasn't dressed as a chicken. The chicken guy, presumably, was standing for a seat against Lorna Slater, who won Edinburgh Central, a Green politician, beating SNP Minister Angus Robertson. She became the first Green candidate elected to the Scottish Parliament through a constituency victory. So normally they get into Holyrood via the list. And we're joined now by Laura Webster, editor of the National newspaper. Thank you so much for coming on. Great to have you back on Novara Media. I suppose, to begin, can you just help us interpret the results? So we've got those constituency results, by which the SNP look like they've done brilliantly. If you're just to look at that, you say, oh, the SNP are stonking home with this. Reform, nowhere to be seen. The Greens, barely anything. What can we expect to see when we get those regional votes in as well?
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much for having me back on the show. Yeah, we're kind of in a state of limbo at the moment. We were hoping that we would have all of the results by this time tonight, but maybe that was wishful thinking. The SNP are going to be by far the largest party, whatever happens in those regional results that are set to come in soon, hopefully. And that is not a surprise. That is what the polls showed us. They've had a pretty good result. They're only about 9 points down on their vote share from 2021. Now, if you think about all of the things that have happened to the SNP since then, you know, Nicola Sturgeon stepping down, having Humza Yousaf as First Minister, all the changes, the criminal case into Peter Murrell, there's been so much happening that could potentially have had a big impact on them. So to only be 9 points down, I think is quite remarkable, really. We also haven't seen a huge drop in turnout, which some people have been predicting. So it's pretty good for the SNP, honestly. Yeah, they're not going to get a majority. That's not possible at the current moment. And yeah, that is going to throw up questions about what's going to happen with the independence referendum, but we can be absolutely certain that there's going to be a pro-independence majority. Now, part of that is the Green result, which we've seen already so successful in the constituencies. That's a historic victory for Holly Bruce in Glasgow South Side, which was Nicola Sturgeon's constituency, and a historic victory for Lorna Slater against Angus Robertson over in Edinburgh Central. Now, those in Scotland will be aware that Angus Robertson had a lot of controversy as a government minister because of a secret meeting he had with the Israeli ambassador. And that nearly cost him his job. And now I think it probably has cost him his job, as he is fourth on the list. So there's no real chance of him getting elected. I think Labour are probably going to have a pretty poor result. Reform's list result might be a bit lower than they were anticipating. I heard them saying this privately at the count. They're a little bit disappointed. And Malcolm Offord, who is the Reform UK Scotland leader's face, was certainly tripping him this afternoon after he came third. So if you think of all of the resources and all of the visibility that Malcolm Offord has had in this campaign, with Nigel Farage behind him and backing him, it's a really, really terrible result for Reform. So I don't think that they're going to be all that happy with their result in Scotland. There's also the Tories. I know you were talking about the Tories in England. Yeah, the Tories have had a pretty terrible time here. They've maintained their seats kind of in the border areas, not that surprising. But besides that, Reform are kind of eating their lunch in the constituencies. And yeah, the Lib Dems have had some gains, so they'll be happy, and especially in those kind of Highland and Island areas that they were targeting. So yeah, that's kind of the roundup for where we are at the moment.
And is the big story here that the SNP have been saved by Keir Starmer? Because, I mean, you spoke there about some of the difficulties that the SNP have had over recent years. And there was a moment sort of in mid-2024 where it looked like Labour were about to overtake the SNP, and we thought that maybe, you know, the SNP's long reign would be over. Obviously, this looks like a stomping win for the SNP. Is that anything that the SNP have done? Did they sort of rescue themselves, or is it just simply that Scottish Labour were unlucky that they had Keir Starmer in Westminster, which drove their potential voters away?
It's maybe a bit of both, Michael. I think you're kind of onto something with both of those points. So first of all, I think the SNP did have a positive campaign. They talked a lot about issues like the cost of living, in which they had some quite radical, well, if you listen to the Scottish media, they're quite radical ideas, maybe just good ideas, to limit the price of essential food items and to limit bus costs, things like that. These would have a positive impact on people's lives, and I'm sure that that's had an impact on their result today. At the same time, back in 2024, when Labour had their very successful election in Scotland, a lot of us were predicting that Keir Starmer would be a disappointing Prime Minister, and that would cost Labour the election up here. I don't think any of us anticipated quite how unpopular Keir Starmer would actually be. And so, yeah, I think the SNP probably are pleased to see how unpopular he has become, because it has given them this result. But don't be thinking that Anas Sarwar is especially popular as well. He's not. He's had a really bad campaign. He's seen as quite untrustworthy. And people are kind of sick of seeing his face. Scottish Labour have spent so much money on this massive digital marketing campaign, which has seemingly had no impact whatsoever. So if you go to watch a YouTube video in Scotland, you're going to see a video of Anna Sarwar before it starts to play. And if anything, I think that's had the opposite impact that they would like it to have.
And I mean, if you look across Europe or most of the Western world at the moment, everyone's talking about the volatility of politics. Governments changing all the time, very difficult for incumbents to get re-elected. Now, if you look at Scotland, the SNP have been the largest party since 2007, I think, so 19 years. Are people in Scotland more satisfied than people everywhere else? Are you just less angry than the rest of the West?
I don't think so. I think people in Scotland are very angry with the state of things. They're very angry at being stuck in the union. And I think you're seeing something similar in Wales as well. People are angry with Labour's performance in government there. And this kind of leads me to this point that I was wanting to make on the show, which is that now you're going to have a pro-independence government in Scotland, you're going to have a pro-independence government in Wales, and you're going to have Sinn Féin leading Northern Ireland. Every part of the UK, apart from England, doesn't want to be in the union anymore. People are very angry with the state of things and they want that to change. I think you can also see that there's frustration with the SNP from this Green result in Edinburgh Central and Glasgow South Side, came very close in some other kind of urban areas. We don't yet have the regional results, so I don't know how they're going to perform. They're probably going to get quite a lot of MSPs, and maybe more than some people were expecting. But yeah, that comes as well from people being frustrated with the SNP. Don't get me wrong, I do not believe that Scotland is a socialist utopia. There is a lot of work to be done. But I think on a lot of measurements, it's significantly better on a lot of social and economic issues than England is. People are a little bit more satisfied with the situation than they are south of the border. But yes, there is a lot of work to be done. I believe, and my readers believe, that that work can be best done through gaining independence.
Laura Webster, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
A bit of some breaking news here that I'm sure is going to be of interest to many people watching this. John Curtis at the BBC has just released his projected national share in Great Britain. So again, this is the estimates for how the results would translate to a nationwide election if people voted in a general election in the same way they do in local elections. So it's not quite a prediction, but it's relevant. This is basically how the parties did on a nationwide level today. Reform, you won't be surprised to hear, are in first at 26%. This is a surprising thing. The Greens in second at 18%. Labour down to fourth in the projected national share. So Reform on 26%, the Greens on 18%, Conservatives on 17%, Labour on 17%, and the Lib Dems on 16%. So very much you're looking at, five-party politics, and then the SNP and Plaid, of course, in Scotland and Wales. Aaron, how seriously should we take these projections? Obviously, people don't vote in general elections exactly the same way they do in local elections, but this is more significant than, say, a poll that puts Green in second place.
Yeah, this is remarkable, Michael. Like you say, Reform on 26, Greens on 18, Labour and Tories on 17, Lib Dems on 16. The Greens, if this is correct, in terms of projected national share, have come second in a national election. I mean, wow. They only had one MP 2 years ago. They'd never won a by-election until February. They'd only ever controlled, I think, one council in terms of majority until today. They've just come second in a national election. That is an accomplishment that it's not on a par with what Reform have done this year or last year, but that's an accomplishment on a par with, I think, UKIP or the Brexit Party in the past. That's the level that the Greens are now operating at. That is extraordinary. And cast your mind back to just last night. People were saying, "Oh, the Greens are underperforming." It was all a fugazi. It was all just social media clicks and viral content. No, this is very real, coming second in a national election. Also, I should say, Michael, 18% Reform and 26%. You can close that. I'm not saying that the Greens will overtake Reform, but Reform can lose a few percent. The Greens can gain a few percent. You might have tactical voting. Things start to look very different. Now, I do agree with what you were saying earlier on. Reform are storming it in clearly a certain kind of constituency in England, which because of our electoral system, I think puts them in a very good place. But that is really, really striking. And all the more striking given the last, 10 days in terms of this full-on assault by the establishment and the media against the Greens. That's not to attack or denigrate the media doing that. They're entitled to do that because the Greens have just finished second. You're allowed to hold the Greens accountable. I think they went way too far, particularly in terms of holding Zach Polanski accountable for a single retweet. Nonetheless, that's the game. Politicians are scrutinised by the media, but voting's done. It's all over, and the Greens have come through with flying colours.
And this is from the BBC as well. So they say the Reform tally of 26% is down on the 30% figure, which the BBC published after last year's local elections. So again, that was last year after those local elections, less places voted. But sort of when John Curtis and the Bods put it together and said, if everyone had voted today, what percent would Reform have got? They got 30. So 30 last year, 30%, 26% this year on those projected vote shares. Has Reform peaked?
I don't think so. I mean, first of all, I know they have a model to kind of extrapolate from this, but they are very different kinds of authorities being contested, and they're kind of within the margin of error. So, if one was saying 40 and one was saying 20, then we could have that conversation. I think it's fair to say that Reform are polling regularly in the mid to high 20s, and the two results over the last 2 years would indicate that's where they are as well. If they get the upper end of that, we're looking at majority. If they get the lower end of that, they'll just be the largest party. In terms of them peaking, I don't know. I think in some ways they have, in terms of their insurgent energy, they have peaked. But I don't think that we've seen the bottom in terms of the Tory and Labour vote. So it sounds strange, but I think the sort of motive power of Reform as they move forward as a political party is partly now a function of what happens to the other two. They don't feel like the insurgent. When they talk about the uni party, you kind of feel like, what are you talking about, really? Come on, you've accepted Robert Jenrick. Robert Jenrick will be the Chancellor of the Exchequer if you guys win. What are you talking about the uni party? They've lost that sheen, I think. And I think in the long term, that might hurt them a little bit. But I would be very wary of saying they've peaked because, after Gorson Denton, that's how it looked, right? And now they've just had a really stonking set of results. So maybe, I think it's a bit too early to say.
And their vote share is, sort of how Labour managed to get a very good result on a low vote share at the last general election. I feel a bit like Reform might be in a similar place now. I mean, Brexit taught us something about Britain's electoral geography, right? Which is that you can't really win a majority on a very sort of liberal position.
That's partly true. And I do agree with you on that. That's partly true. But we have seen, and I've never been a fan of tactical voting, Michael, and I don't believe in a quote-unquote progressive majority, but we have now seen a number of examples where people have voted tactically against Reform, and it's worked. You see it in Caerphilly with the by-election. You see it with the Senedd elections. I think the reason why the Greens have kind of underwhelmed, they just got 2 MSs. They were kind of looking to get more, I think because people went to Plaid, because they were taking seriously the prospect of Reform being the largest party at Cardiff Bay. So you are seeing that. And I think if you look at those tallies there, I just added this up, I think Reform and the Tories, in terms of the projected national share from these results, they are on 43, the Lib Dems, Greens and Labour on 51. Now, I know it doesn't work like that. I don't classify the Liberal Democrats as a centre-left party. But 43, if people do vote tactically in the right places, if the Greens moderate their message slightly, if Labour had somebody who wasn't Keir Starmer as leader, maybe Andy Burnham, I do think it's very competitive.
And how do you think this will change sort of how politics is discussed in this country? I mean, obviously, the weekend is all going to be about is there going to be a move where people sort of push Keir Starmer? Now, it seems like everyone is suggesting, from sort of all the political journalists and their tweets, they're saying their soundings from the PLP is that they want to wait a bit longer. And basically because, the Starmer loyalists want to keep Starmer if there are any of those anymore. The soft left want to wait a bit more so they can get Andy Burnham in. I don't know what Wes Streeting is waiting for, because it's not like, I suppose he's just hoping that something will come up that means that suddenly the Labour membership falls in love with him. I don't know what's going to happen there.
Presumably Wes Streeting is waiting for the Mandelson saga to come to a closure of some kind.
Good point.
Suits all parties, right?
Do you think this will change anything? Do you think this does put more pressure on Keir Starmer, or is this also is this kind of all noise? Have we not really, because these are very dramatic election results. At the same time, none of it's really surprising. Maybe that projected vote share is the most surprising thing we've seen so far.
It's not surprising, but it's still pretty bad, right? Not coming in the top 2 in the Celtic nations, getting a hiding in London. So it's pretty bad. Sadiq Khan, he's thinking now, maybe Zoe Garbett's going to have a tilt for London Mayor. I could lose. These are powerful people like Sadiq Khan, Andy Burnham, Angela Rayner. Look at what's happened to Labour in the Greater Liverpool region, the Greater Manchester City region. They will lose Liverpool at this rate next year if they carry on with Keir Starmer at the helm. So on the one hand, yes, and Keir Starmer can say, well, look, I won in the past. I defied expectations. I can do it again. That's a fair argument. I don't agree with it. But this is so bad. And I think so many people stand to lose out. I think he's gonna go sooner or later.
We've been talking about reform. We can actually go to some comments from reform politicians. They've been the big winners in the English local elections. Here's a snapshot of their day.
Our message is UKIP's here, working hard with local communities. Sorry, Reform is here.
People are turning out, and they've turned out to repaint the red wall, the turquoise wall. But I think overall what's happened is a truly historic shift in British politics. We've been so used to thinking about politics in terms of left and right, and yet what Reform are able to do is to win in areas that have always been conservative, but equally, we're proving in a big way we can win in areas that Labour have dominated, frankly, since the end of World War I. Personally, I'd be very sad to see the Prime Minister go. I would be very, very sad indeed. He's the greatest asset we've got. Yeah.
He's looking pretty smug, isn't he? Smug because, whether or not he's peaked, Reform are still the favourites to be the largest party at the next general election. Unfortunately, even the liberal media in this country seems more interested in stoking moral panics about Zach Polanski than they do about holding Nigel Farage to account. If you want to support a different media, you know what to do. You can go to novaramedia.com/support. I like to think we put quite a lot of effort into this organisation and this show. We're ever appreciative for you guys tuning in, especially on big political moments like this. We've got 4,500 of you watching. If 100 or so of you were to, this evening, sign up at novaramedia.com/support, that would make such a difference. We'd be absolutely delighted, and we can continue to make our plans ever more ambitious. I should say we do actually have an announcement next week on that front. But between now and then, you know the score, novaramedia.com/support. I'm joined by Helena, a.k.a. No Justice, MTG, our surprise guest.
I was just in the area, popped in.
Just in the area, just wandering by.
Absolutely.
We just had a clip of Reform and Nigel Farage. Who do you think is going to be happier this evening, Farage or Polanski?
I don't think I could really say which one of them would be happier, because they're both happy for different reasons and with different expectations, right? The whole thing with these elections is there was a narrative in the run-up to them about how baked in a bunch of the Reform gains would be, right? It was all supposed to be baked in that we knew Labour were going to lose thousands of councillors, Reform were going to win thousands of councillors, and there would be some number of Green gains. Those were initially going to be quite low, then it went really high again in terms of the prediction, and then it was going to be low, and then it's turned out to be better than we thought because the media impact of the rocky last couple of weeks isn't really affecting the vote share as much as we thought we would. So there are reasons for everyone to be cheerful on both sides of the kind of the populist right and left in this country in the wake of what we're seeing from these results. But I do think that in terms of the level of switching we're seeing from voting groups, Reform have the most to gain here. Remember that result that we talked about earlier? It was the first result I saw that was announced when I was following on my Twitter feed last night. The one from Halton, where Reform from a standing start got up to an absolute majority of the vote, and Labour lost 50%. 50% this was a Cheshire ward. It was near Runcorn, that kind of area where Reform closely won that. But it was 6 votes, wasn't it? In the by-election in Runcorn and Helsby, that area of the country. And now they're not just eating into Labour's vote. Labour's vote's totally capitulated in these kind of areas of the country. I don't think Farage would expect to get a 50-point voter swing in somewhere like Cheshire, which has historically been an incredibly Labour area. The swings we're seeing from Green to Labour are not as big, and whilst they're certainly cannibalising the vote, it's not this wholesale kind of capitulation of Labour in those areas, because Reform can look at this and go, these areas are going to be ours for a long time. I don't cock it up. I mean, given what we've seen from Reform so far, maybe they will do on a council level, but as long as they just don't screw things up. They have these areas in the bag.
Frontier in Space says, please talk about Newcastle. Labour lost control with 34 councillors, now down to only 2. Yes, 2. In Newcastle, Green surge, Labour collapse. You were going to love our next segment. God, it's like we knew you were coming. Before we go on to that segment, though, Helena, indulge me. You're a Green Party member. Like me, you're a bit of a left yimby. What are your hopes, your fears about all these councils that the Green Party are now controlling?
I think there's a level of realism that's involved. I don't think that necessarily it's going to mean huge amounts of blocking of new house building and new developments, for example, especially in like brownfield sites. I know Zach Polanski, when he was running to be the leader of the Green Party, spoke to Turn Left and was saying that, well, we can still use brownfield sites for these development plans, but the idea that just because it's being an entirely developer-led model will mean that the Greens are just going to shut everything down and there's going to be no building at all. I think they realise that unless they deliver on the interests of the people in their area, they're not going to be in administration for very long. I mean, maybe I'm a little bit too hopeful, because again, Mamdani, as we talked about earlier, very specifically was just like, well, I have a limited amount of power in a municipal role. I have a limited with with regards to budgets. I'm limited with regards to the amount of power that I have to be able to, change the zeitgeist in terms of how these policies are put into place. And I think that once a lot of people will get into office with huge kind of high-flying expectations of what they can or could be able to do. And in reality, local government, you're really restricted at the moment. Like we talking before, I think it was Zoe Garbett about the no austerity, no cuts budgets. You can't do that. Like, you just can't do that anymore, because if you don't follow the budgets set out by the government, they take over. They just take over and they apply I forget what the name of the
administration or the administrators come in?
Yeah, the administrators come in, that's right. And then they will impose budgets upon you unless you follow those rules. It's not like the militant era of the 80s where you could just totally stonewall national government the way you can right now. So I think there'll be a level of realism when they look at the scale. Because, I mean, in terms of London councils especially, these are areas where they do have money to spend. They do actually, these are why I think that we've broadly seen these places stave off the populist right, is because in the areas where there's lots of young people, where there's lots of affluent people, where there's lots of business and lots of footfall and consumption, business rates generate a lot of revenue for these councils and, of course, the London mayoralty, meaning that services are good, more broadly, much better than in post-industrial Britain. And so getting into office, you probably are looking at staying there for the long haul unless you really screw up.
Apologies. Let's fulfil the wishes of viewer Frontier in Space and talk about the North East. It's been a particular target for reform in these elections, and in Hartlepool, reform swept the deck, winning all seats up for election this year. They gained 11. If you're wondering why they gained 11 but they still don't have control, that's because only a third of the seats were up for election in most of these places. That result led Labour MP Jonathan Brash to call for Prime Minister Keir Starmer's resignation, although it's not the first time he said Starmer must go. There were massive gains for reform in Sunderland as well. I mean, this one is really, really dramatic. So reform go to like complete dominance on the council. They gain 58 seats, Labour down 45. So that is just a stunning result. Worrying if you're concerned about reform coming into power. There was also a reform victory in Gateshead, so reform up 38, Labour down 34. South Tyneside also saw reform take control, with the Greens now in opposition. So sort of two stories there. Elections to Newcastle City Council saw Labour lose 43 seats. So here the Greens gained 20, Reform gained 24, the Lib Dems gained 1. Now, this is a very interesting council because you've got basically a complete three-way split. The Lib Dems on 25, the Greens on 24, the Conservatives on 24. So I wonder what coalition will form there. I'll ask my guest in a moment. To talk us through what's happened and what it means, I'm joined now by Jamie Driscoll, former Mayor of North of Tyne. And I think you're now a Green Party member, am I correct?
That's correct, yeah, as of December last year, Michael.
And talk me through, actually, let's start on Newcastle. So if you've got sort of a freeway split between the Greens, the Lib Dems and Reform, what are we likely to see there? I mean, the Lib Dems had the most seats, didn't they? So would it be a Lib Dem sort of minority administration propped up by the Greens or some sort of coalition? What do you expect to see?
Well, I honestly don't have an answer for you because the results have just come in. I've just got back in from the council. I haven't put a T-shirt on. And so there'll be various chats tomorrow. I think people are celebrating tonight. And then we'll be talking amongst ourselves, talking with the Lib Dems. What will happen, definitely, is there will only be a coalition if it's going to produce definitely progressive policies, community wealth building, not having bailiffs coming in for council tax arrears. Beyond that, actually, one of the really good things about being in the Green Party, there's not a load of egos. There's not people saying, I want to be on this committee, I want to chair this committee. So actually, it will be, if it's a coalition, it'll be a progressive coalition that we'll hold them to. What you've been able to show there is the seats. What isn't obvious is the vote share. So we got 65,700 votes and the Lib Dems got 56,000 votes. So I will be saying to them, you people are supposed to believe in proportional representation, so we should be the administration.
So I didn't say it in my introduction, and I should have done it in my research, but you've just been elected a Green councillor, haven't you?
That's right, yeah. In my old ward.
Congratulations. Sorry, that wasn't in my notes. But good job, good show.
Right. The Labour wipeout, Michael, has been astonishing. They're down to 2 councillors and they were on a knife edge in a split ward. Yeah, so, it was obviously I was a Labour mayor. I was elected as a Labour mayor, then I was an independent mayor and ran as an independent. But it's a bit Star Wars, isn't it? You can't win, Kiera. If you strike me down, I'll become more powerful than you can possibly imagine. So, this is the Labour heartland.
Why did the Lib Dems
Northeast
do so well in Newcastle? I mean, we've talked a lot about Greens and Reform tonight.
The Lib Dems pretty much had those seats anyway. So what you find in Newcastle is the more affluent areas vote Lib Dem in the local elections. They tend to vote Tory in the, Lib Dem in the locals, tend to vote Tory in the generals. What's interesting, the mayoral campaign in Newcastle, there were 16,000 people that same day voted Lib Dem in the locals, but 10,000 of them voted for me in the mayoral election. So they're not so much Lib Dem voters as people who vote Lib Dem. And they can be won over. And this is what, you were talking to Elena earlier. The Greens are pretty much hegemonic now amongst the progressive vote. To push on, we need to... There's a lot of people want to vote Green. They like the idea of a compassionate government, but they still buy into this, we mustn't spook the bond markets, there'll be hyperinflation, all of that. If we can demonstrate that the economics that we want to deliver are a safe pair of hands, that it adds up, which it does. And, I can have those arguments and win people. If the Green Party as a whole fights on that territory, we will do very well in the next general election.
Talk to me about Sunderland. I think of Sunderland as sort of like a city. I wouldn't have, I'd have thought Reform to be competitive there, but like completely dominant. So 58 seats, huge majority. It looks like they've got 3/4 of the seats there. This is a city which is represented by Labour MPs, has been represented by Labour MPs for decades. Has it just been lost to the right now? Is Sunderland a lost cause?
I predicted this. It was very likely to happen. Sunderland Labour Party had very severe problems. So you had an MP like Julie Elliott in one of the most Brexit voting constituencies in the country, basically telling people who voted Brexit that was stupid. That's not a good way to endear yourself to people. Graham Miller, who was leader of the council, had been losing seats to Tories and Lib Dems for a long time. He turned it round, but he'd supported me when I was in the Labour Party. So when I left, he was the elected council leader. They just took him out and replaced him with one of Julie Elliott's staffers. So the Labour Party itself has collapsed. Fiona Miller, his wife, came over to the Green Party. So I think half of it is that the Labour Party shot itself in the foot.
And I suppose let's talk about politics going forward in the general election, because from where I stand, I'll put my cards on the table, right? I think the Greens getting all this support has been brilliant for the political conversation, because for a while it was just Labour getting dragged to the right by Reform making the entire political conversation. Like they were basically just dominant in how everyone talked about politics. I'm also not particularly convinced that the Greens sort of have what it takes to be a sort of really national party, because I'm not sure they're going to be, I think they're going to really struggle to identify with so many of those constituencies that someone needs to win. And so my hope is that Andy Burnham becomes the leader of the Labour Party and can form a sort of bigger, broader coalition which unites both sort of students, ethnic minorities, and then sort of whiter constituencies in places like Greater Manchester or Tyneside. I suppose you're a Green Party councillor now, so you sort of constitutionally have to disagree with me. So sort of, I suppose, persuade me why I'm wrong.
Well, the good thing is in the Green Party, you don't have to. You don't have to look over your shoulder that someone's going to kick you out for telling the truth. So I know Andy well. We worked well together as mayors. If he ends up as Labour leader, and there's some hurdles for him to clear, he still inherits a Labour Party that has the same people in control of it. He has Wes Streeting on the backbenches and Rachel Reeves. Can he really turn it around? Is he? Andy's a social democrat, it's fair to say. He's not going to be someone who's going to radically change the way the economy works in favour of working people. I don't think that's his agenda, much as I like him, and I think he's very competent. So I think what it needs, I think you're right, the Green Party at the moment, the Green Surge is 6 months old, 7-8 months old. It needs to do some serious work so that all those green curious people who, yes, they care about the environment, yes, they like the idea of getting rid of poverty, but at the moment they're also thinking, do I trust these people with my taxes? Is my pension going to be safe? This is where the Green Party, if it pushes on, looks ready for government, then actually I think it will do very well. Because the politics that we're seeing, when I was elected in 2019 as mayor, Theresa May was Prime Minister. I worked with 4 Prime Ministers and 6 Chancellors in a 5-year term. And things are no more stable now. Reform today are inheriting the wave of the last year or so, but they are on the way down. They've been losing by-elections in the northeast. And it's going to we will continue to have a febrile politics until somebody comes up with a credible plan that gets the cut through that says, this is how we fix the transport system. This is how we fix housing. Yes, these people are going to be taxed. Yes, we're going to do this with borrowing. We're going to do this with monetary policy and money creation, whatever it is. And has those arguments so that we don't end up arguing all the time about who retweeted what about policemen or something like that. So that's the challenge the Green Party have to rise to. We will rebuild the country. This is the plan. If we can do that, then who knows what's going to happen in 2029.
Jamie Driscoll, thank you so much for joining us. Congratulations for your election. My apologies,
Cheers,
I
Michael.
did not include that in your introduction, but always a pleasure to speak to you on the show. We're coming to the end of our show, so I think we're obliged to show you 46 seconds of a relatively irrelevant party.
There is a sense in the whole country that Labour and the Conservatives have let the country down, and people are looking for change. Now, sometimes they go for change which I think is from extreme populist parties like Reform and Green, but their message of change is quite destructive. It's burn it all down change. I think Liberal Democrats offer a different change, which is a build-up change that's more in tune with British values of decency, tolerance, respect for individual freedom and the rule of law. And I think I'm really proud of that message of change that we have. And only the Liberal Democrats can do that. We're the only non-populist party that can offer change. We're the only non-extremist party that can offer the change that people want.
We're not actually going to talk about the Liberal Democrats. We just showed you that clip so that Ash could have a chance to get back onto the set. So it was purely for the purposes of a clean segue. Unless you do really want to talk about Ed Davey, I don't know.
I don't really want. Well, look, I think there's a way in which you can frame the Liberal Democrats as a soft anti-politics option. So I think that was a big part of Ed Davey's pitch to the public. That's all why he's like sliding around all the time. He's like constantly on like a, mechanical bull and bucking bronco. That sort of silliness is a way of sort of communicating to middle class, Middle England voters and saying, I'm a soft anti-politics option. So seeing how that develops and how that takes bites out of the Conservatives in Southwest England, also some of the outer London boroughs as well, how it competes with the Greens now that they've chosen an electoral strategy which centres around multiracial, working class and downwardly mobile graduates, and also Labour in some places. Let's see how that goes. Waitrose voters have a lot of options, is what I'm saying.
They've got some great product lines. We are going to wrap up. So let's have some summing up. What should people... Has anything today surprised you? And where do you see these election results leaving British politics as we move forward?
So I was thinking about what the Labour Party's options for survival going into 2029 are. I actually don't think that a change of leader even now would be enough to stave off an election loss. Could be wrong about that, but from where I'm sitting, Reform are so competitive, they're so dominant. I mean, there are noises being made about could they take Bradford? That tells you something about the strength and the discipline of their operation. Something which I think Tom Newton-Dunn just said on Twitter was that if Keir Starmer used his parliamentary supermajority to ram through a form of proportional representation, that would lock Reform out basically forever. Because while Labour would never be able to govern alone, with various sorts of coalition pacts between them, Lib Dems, Greens, you might even think about some sort of confidence and supply arrangements with the SNP and Plaid as well, that would lock Reform out. Now, that's absolutely not something that Keir Starmer is putting on the table. Instead, what the, Starmerite faction are saying, it's the Paul Mason line of vote Green, get Reform. And what these results show is that people essentially have turned around and said, okay. Like they've turned around and they've said, okay. Reform have done fairly well in places where Labour's vote split and went to the Greens, but that wasn't all there was to it, right? It's that thing of capitalising on Labour's lack of strategy, the competitor from the left being the Greens, but also they're doing Boris Plus. So that really is the only way in which I can see Labour boxing out Reform. To think about proportional representation for just a tiny bit longer, as I was listening to you and I was listening to these newly minted Green councillors and mayors talk about their political vision, is that it seems to me that Zach Polanski is running a proportional representation strategy before this proportional representation. So I think it's totally legitimate to say, look, what we're going to do is be Labour's competitor to their left. We're going to be socially liberal, economically on the left, and culture war issues where marginalised people, whether it's asylum seekers or trans people being demonised, we're going to go whole hog on defending these communities. And when you look at how that shakes out at a general election, you go, well, maybe not good. I mean, you will have a decent spread across the country, but it's going to be really hard to consolidate that and turn that out in terms of seats in a first past the post win. You'd go, that's a proportional representation strategy. That doesn't mean that they've hit their ceiling, no, not by any means. But I think that sort of tells you where its limits might be. Because then, and this is sort of thinking about what do these results mean in terms of locking out Reform, right? Like that is going to be an ever bigger part of how left-wing parties, by which I mean everyone to the left of the Conservatives, is going to be thinking about the next few years. Maybe Zach Polanski's best option would be being a junior partner in a coalition with Labour, or maybe a bit better than junior if he could do, very, very well in London seats. And I think that requires thinking amongst Green Party members. What are your priorities going to be? Because there are going to be areas of your policy platform that are going to be placed on the chopping block, on the negotiating table if you go into coalition of any kind. And how are you also going to build a party which is able to prioritise? I don't think that the Scottish Greens, when they pulled the plug on the coalition agreement with the SNP, were particularly strategic, doing it over the Cass review. But you are going to want to keep your politicians' feet to the fire on certain key issues. So I think that if you look at where the Greens are at, right, insurgent, influx of new energy, in a way, they need to now start taking some lessons from Reform, right, which is a fabulous electoral machine, right, really, really effective, and also a level of internal discipline and clarity on strategy, which has been benefiting them really, really well. So don't learn from Reform on the racism, obviously leave that alone, but there are certain things I think the Greens could take.
I think also learn from Labour in 2019, right? And that's because what I think about the Greens is undoubtedly incredibly impressive what they've done. As I keep saying, I think the Green surge has been a relief because British politics was heading in such a depressing direction where Reform were making all of the political conversation. Basically, it was all just resolving around their talking points, and that has changed. But I do think that the Greens, for all their success, haven't solved the main problem that progressives have in Britain, which is that it's really hard to build a majority when there are groups of people with very different values. And the Greens, because they are focusing on progressive activist voters, yes, they're sweeping them up, right? And that's impressive coming from nothing. Like Zach Polanski, incredible communicator, very, very effective. Obviously, electing him leader has transformed sort of the prospects of the Green Party, and you have to respect that. But at the same time, the central question of progressive politics in Britain has not been solved, which is how do you win a progressive majority? And that question has not yet been answered.
I think that there is just this tension, which I think I mentioned earlier, between mass membership, maximum party democracy, and also having a really clear winning strategy, all right? These things all sit in tension with one another. If I'm the Green Party, which I'm not, I would look at who it was that was really in charge of the campaigns on the ground in Haringey, Hackney, Walthamstow and Hastings, and I would hire them. And I would spend money on punting them around the country, going, how can you replicate this in all of our target seats? To the best of my knowledge, that's not something that's happening. And so you end up with this patchiness where there's unexpected levels of opportunity out there, but the Greens are almost unprepared for it. So either it's paper candidates, or maybe it's candidates who are going hard on messaging, which isn't necessarily relevant to national or local issues. I think Aaron was talking about a Green candidate close to where he lives who was going really hard on animal cruelty. I'm not saying animal cruelty isn't important. I don't think it's a top 3 issue for anyone, locally in Pompey or indeed nationally at the moment. So I just think that there is a level of coordination and a level of discipline which is currently missing from the Green Party, which is absolutely essential for their next phase of growth.
We're going to wrap up. Before we go, I'm going to end on saying something we haven't talked about, which is incredibly interesting, which is Birmingham. Our excuse for not having talked about it is that the results are still coming in. So it's at the moment 69 of 101 seats declared. Reform have won 17. The Conservatives 15, down 1. So the Reform have gained 17. The Tories down 1. Labour down 28. The Lib Dems have gained 1. The Greens have gained 6. The Independents, so far, have only gained 5. I thought that could have been higher. We'll come back to talk about that on Monday. In the meantime, I urge you to watch Aaron Bastani's brilliant mini documentary from Birmingham.
Can I do a tiny bit of gassing up about that documentary?
Yes.
Because I watched it yesterday and I am a Bastani's Britain addict, right? Whenever there's a new episode, I'm like, get this shit in my veins. And the reason why I like it, and you don't see anyone else doing this, you don't see this in anywhere but Westminster, is there's always this thing which surprises you. So you come in with your set of expectations of what it is you're going to see. And you have an idea of like, oh, well, the lefty take on this is going to be this. And I think Aaron's got the sort of curiosity to peel away from that a bit. And he's also got an ability to make people quite talk candidly. I don't know what it is he's feeding them. And it means that on camera, you get these moments of real political surprise. And within all of that, and it is entertaining and it is funny and all the rest of it, is something which is super politically important, which is in Birmingham, the Labour patronage networks amongst the South Asian Muslim community are in the process of breaking down. That is playing out in terms of the results that are still coming in from Birmingham City Council. And I didn't hear or see anyone telling that story before I watched the documentary. And that's why you've got to donate to Novara Media.
Got to donate to Novara Media.
No one does this stuff. No one does this stuff.
We haven't yet sort of got a button on our website where you can donate specifically to Bastani's Britain, but let it be known, the more you donate to Novara Media, the more Bastani will be sent around the country to make these fantastic
He's never going to see his wife and child again.
Yeah, sorry about that, Charlotte. But he's working for a higher cause. Let's wrap up there. Ash, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
My thank you to Aaron and Helena and all my brilliant guests this evening. Thank you so much for tuning in. We still have, I think, about 4,500 of you watching after 2.5 hours. If that's not good enough reason to support us, I don't know what would be. novaramedia.com/support is the place to do it. Of course, come back on Monday for another live show from 6 p.m. We'll be doing more analysis of sort of any election results that we hadn't yet got this afternoon. And of course, if there's any drama within the Labour Party over the weekend, we will be discussing that as well.
Drama in the Labour Party?
I mean, at the moment, there's not enough drama. Like, they're all biting their tongues, aren't they? It's a bit disappointing. In any case, that's it for now. You've been watching Novara Media. Good night.